Chapter 184. Black Mountain fighting for water. The saber-cleaved Xiao Hongguolai took the brunt of Xiao Mu's thunder palms and was seriously injured. He hadn't fully recovered yet, and after the fierce battle, his injuries were even worse. The wind was strong and the waves were strong, so he didn't have a place to heal. However, he kept his word. Although he escaped, he didn't go far and still returned. Now that he was fine, he didn't have the mood to ask about Xiao Mu's condition. He asked Zhang Yan for a few medicinal pills and went to the quiet room to heal. The next day, Lu Meinyang recovered her mana after a night of rest. She came out to thank him. Zhang Yan exchanged a few polite words with her and calculated the time. It was already the middle of the 10th month, so it was time to go get the water. He didn't waste any more time and drove the Dragon Country's ship straight to Black Mountain Island. On the way, Lu Meinyang, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said softly, "I'm afraid my daughter Yan Rong is with Xiao Han. She's young and inexperienced. If she offends him later, I hope you can forgive her." This girl was Elder Yan's youngest daughter. She was born in her mother's womb for more than 3 years. When she was born, she had a cultivation technique cave and was protected by elders. She hadn't experienced any hardships. Even after cultivating for more than 100 years, she was only at Ming Qi level. Earlier, it was this girl who told Xiao Han about the island's restrictions, which caught Lu Meinyang off guard and trapped her. Zhang Yan couldn't be bothered to ask about such a person at all, and he just pointed at her. "Fellow Taoist Lu, this is your family's matter, so I naturally won't interfere. But if anyone rashly interferes in the matter between me and Xiao Han, then don't blame me for not showing mercy." Hearing the murderous intent in Zhang Yan's words, Lu Meinyang's heart tightened. Although her cultivation was much higher than Zhang Yan's, she didn't know why she couldn't help but feel a sense of fear when standing next to him. She quickly said, "Thank you, fellow Lu. When we get there, I will discipline her well." Zhang Yan nodded and said no more. Not long after the dragon boat traveled, a small island with a circumference of less than 10 miles appeared in front of them. There were thousands of egrets flying and circling around the island. In the middle of the island, there was a black mountain that looked like a mound of earth. It pierced through the sky and was covered by fog. Lu Meinyang gazed from afar for a while and suddenly said, "Taoist Zhang, if you want to take the 4 marquises' water, I'm afraid you'll have to wait until next month." Zhang Yan looked at her and said, "Why do you say so?" Lu Meinyang gently rolled up her sleeves and pointed to the sky, saying, "Fellow Taoist, please take a look. There is a cloud below the Black Mountain, and this is the sign of the 60-year season's sweet rain. However, it is not fully ripe yet, so the color is white, and the color is multicolored. This is the time." Zhang Yan looked up and saw that, just as Lu Meinyang had said, there was a motionless white cloud leaning against the mountainside. Lu Meinyang had lived here for hundreds of years and was the owner of this place. She knew the surroundings like the back of her hand, so what she said was not a lie. Zhang Yan looked at the island and his eyes were deep. He said, "As to who this water belongs to, I, Xiao Han, will have to fight it out. Demon King Lu, if you find it difficult, you can leave." Although Lu Meinyang had a gentle temperament, she was also a great demon that had cultivated for hundreds of years. She could naturally see that Zhang Yan had the intention to recruit her, so he was letting her choose whether to stay or leave. Yan Jingting once said in the letter that Zhang Yan had a bright future. She weighed the pros and cons and thought to herself, "I have cultivated for almost 500 years. If I can't step into the Yuanying realm, I will only have 100 years left. This Taoist Zhang's heavenly lake of Xiaoyu is a cave. If I can cultivate there, just now, there is hope for me to peek into Tao." Thus, she only hesitated for a moment and made a decision. She said, "I am willing to go with you." Zhang Yan smiled and nodded, "Come with me, my friend." He turned into a conveyance light and flew toward the island. Lu Meinyang also followed. When he got closer, Zhang Yan's eyes swept across the entire island. He saw 2 people standing on top of a mountain rock. One of them was a handsome man with a tall hat and a wide belt, but he exuded an air of arrogance. Beside him stood a woman in white. Her appearance and figure were excellent, and her facial features vaguely resembled Lu Meinyang. She must be Yen Rong. Seeing two conveyance lights flying over, Xiao Han turned his head. Although he had never seen Zhang Yan before, he had seen his portrait before he left home. Now that he saw it, he was shocked. He turned his gaze again and saw that the other person was Lu Meinyang. His expression changed slightly. In an instant, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. He couldn't help but panic and scolded, "What is fourth uncle doing? He can't even handle such a small matter properly. How did he let these two people get together?" However, no matter how hard he thought, he would never have thought that Xiao Mu had already been eliminated by Zhang Yan. He thought that Xiao Mu had missed these two people when he was chasing the enemy. Lu Meinyang's conveyance light landed. She put on a straight face and said to the girl coldly, "Rong, why are you not coming?" Yen Rong's pretty face was slightly panicked. She looked at Xiao Han and said timidly, "Mother, why are you here?" "Aren't you?" Lu Meinyang sighed and said, "I was helped by fellow Zhang to escape. I owe him a favor, and I must repay him. If you come here now, you are still my daughter." Hearing this, Xiao Han frowned and thought that things were not good. Yen Rong's face turned pale. She hesitated for a while and finally shook her head, as if she had made up her mind. She moved to Xiao Han's side and leaned on him. She said, "Mother, I love Xiao Lang and have already married him. Since I am the wife of the Xiao family, I am also a member of the Xiao family. Please forgive me for being unfilial." Lu Meinyang was so angry that her face turned green. Her chest heaved up and down. She raised her slender finger and pointed at her, saying, You, if you don't come here, I won't recognize." She originally said that she wouldn't recognize Yen Rong as her daughter, but she was still her own flesh and blood after all. Yen Rong, on the other hand, was ruthless. She turned her head and said in a low voice, "Mother, just pretend that you don't have a daughter like me." At first, Xiao Han wanted to use Yen Rong to prevent Lu Meinyang from interfering. But after hearing what Yen Rong said, he couldn't help but shake his head and scold himself for being stupid. Hearing this, Lu Meinyang felt as if she was struck by lightning. She pressed her hand on her chest and took 2 steps back. She was completely disheartened. She sighed and said, "Forget it. What's the use of keeping such a vile child who doesn't recognize her parents?" She raised her hand and slapped. A white gas flew out and hit Yen Rong's forehead. With a crack, Yen Rong fell to the ground. She was dead. Xiao Han frowned slightly and took a step to the side. He tidied up his sleeves as if he was afraid that the blood would stain his robe. He looked up at Zhang Yan and said coldly, "You are Zhang Yan? You must be here for the 4 Marquises' water. But even if you invited the demon cultivators from overseas to help, I'm not afraid." Zhang Yan glanced at Xiao Han and saw that he was putting on a strong front. He smiled mockingly and turned to Lu Meinyang, "Demon King Lu, I'll have to trouble you to protect me outside the island." Lu Meinyang killed her daughter with her own hands, so her mind was a little unsettled. Hearing this, she nodded and said, "Be careful, fellow Taoist. I'll be waiting 5 miles away." Seeing her leave, Xiao Han heaved a sigh of relief. He did not dare to ignore the pressure of a 3rd-tier core transformation cultivator. Now that it was not in front of him, even though it was not far away, it gave him courage. He pointed at Zhang Yan and shouted coldly, "Zhang Yan, the heaven and earth strange things belong to those who are virtuous. Back then, there was internal strife between you and your disciples. Thanks to the seniors of my family supporting the situation, we were able to turn the tide and not collapse. It can be seen that my family is the mainstay of Qinsang School. The 4 Marquises' water should be taken by me. It's not something you can covet. Even if you borrow someone else's hand to take it, it will still be overturned under the general situation. To tell you the truth, I have a Yuanying senior to protect me. If you know what's good for you, you'd better leave quickly. Otherwise, don't blame me for not showing mercy when the time comes." Although he said that he was disdainful of Zhang Yan used only one sword to sweep through the 6 rivers and 4 islands. Zhang Yan's ferocious reputation was known, so deep in his heart, he was extremely afraid of him. He also cherished his life very much, so he really did not dare to make a move. Therefore, he planned to intimidate the other party with words, hoping to scare the other party away. Zhang Yan laughed coldly. He looked straight at Xiao Han and said, "I don't care what your name is, and I don't care where you come from. I only know that today, you and I are both here for the 4 Marquises' water. If you have the guts, then come and fight me to determine the winner and the loser." Both of his eyes were oppressive. After reaching the 2nd tier of the spirit comprehension contract, his body was covered in whaley. Every word he spat out was like a clap of thunder. When he finished speaking, his voice shook the sea, causing rumbling echoes in all directions. Thousands of egrets flew up from behind him, as if they had gathered into a boundless tide. The momentum was extremely shocking. Xiao Han's face turned pale, and he unconsciously took a step back. Zhang Yan stared at him, took a step forward, and yelled in a low voice, "Xiao Han, I ask you, do you dare to fight me?" His clothes fluttered as he stepped forward. His battle intent surged, and adding on the fact that the ocean behind him seemed to be boiling, there was a natural pressure coming towards Xiao Han. Xiao Han was forced back by his aura, and he couldn't help but take a few steps back. He wanted to fight, but his chest seemed to be blocked by something. His mouth opened and closed, but he couldn't say a single word. For a direct disciple of a big family like him, his path was smooth from the moment he was born. His seniors would take care of everything for him, and he didn't need to worry about anything else. That was why he was able to improve and reach the 3rd level of the mystic light realm before the age of 25, which was why he was sent out to train. Even so, he had cultivators with high cultivation protecting him, and his experience in fighting others was limited to a few of his own race. If he could return to his race and successfully form his golden core, he wouldn't be afraid of fighting with Zhang Yan. However, he wasn't ready yet. Zhang Yan was different. He relied on himself to kill his way to where he was today. Compared to him, Xiao Han, who hadn't gone through any training, was weaker in both mind and will. Seeing him like this, Zhang Yan couldn't help but frown and yell, "My Wen family chose a few people to fight with me, and I thought they were all elites. But now that we meet again, how come you don't even have the courage to draw your sword? How are you worthy of being my opponent?" As soon as these words came out, Xiao Han was incomparably humiliated. He couldn't take it anymore and shouted, "Zhang Yan, do you think I'm afraid of you?" He shook his sleeve and took out a seal. This treasure floated in the air with the seal facing downwards. The talisman characters flowed on it, and just as it was about to let out a light, a clear light flew out from between Zhang Yan's eyebrows and froze it in the air. Seeing this, Xiao Han couldn't help but be shocked and angry. He took a few steps back and put his hand behind his back. He took out a thin needle and thought, "Zhang Yan, do you think I can't deal with you?" With a flick of his finger, the needle flew out silently. It circled in the air and headed towards the back of Zhang Yan's head. This needle was called Een Crossing Dragon Beard Needle. The front part was as hard as metal, and the back part was as soft as cotton. When it flew, it was extremely fast. Once it entered the body, it would wander around and mess up the internal organs and acupoints. At that time, the opponent would be at his mercy. The sword orb between Zhang Yan's eyebrows seemed to have sensed danger and jumped forward on its own. A sword ray slashed down and hit the needle. However, the needle curved and bounced back, but it wasn't stopped. It still slipped under the sword and headed straight for Zhang Yan. Xiao Han couldn't help but be overjoyed. He didn't look at the result and formed a spell. A magic sword appeared in the air and he commanded it to slash down on Zhang Yan's head. At the same time, he shouted and a 7-colored cloud appeared on his head. In the bright light, a scorching yang fire was released. The fiery light was also burning towards Zhang Yan's body. Zhang Yan slightly squinted his eyes, his face showed a mocking expression. He tilted his head to one side, a zheng sound was heard as the dragon beard needle bounced off his head. He raised his hand again and in a split second he caught the flying sword that was flying towards him. His 5 fingers slightly closed and the sword was broken, and he casually threw it at his feet. Seeing the mysterious light and the scorching yang fire coming over, he stretched out his hands and a beast-faced broadsword appeared in his hands. With a loud shout, he swung the broadsword downwards. The broadsword light was torn apart like silk. Then, he stepped on the clouds and took large strides. Force, force. Xiao Han's expression changed. He didn't expect that the move that he had painstakingly planned would be broken in an instant. Seeing Zhang Yan coming with the broadsword like a tiger pouncing on its prey, his eyes couldn't help but reveal a frightened expression. For a moment, he froze on the spot. When Zhang Yan got close, his eyes flashed. He raised the broadsword and waved it. This broadsword was incomparably fast. Xiao Han subconsciously tilted his body, but the broadsword landed squarely on his shoulder. He staggered and fell to the ground. At this time, he came to his senses and knew that the situation wasn't good. He resisted the pain from his shoulder and rolled up his sleeves. He turned into a beam of light and escaped. Just now, Zhang Yan only felt that the broadsword was slightly sluggish. He thought that the opponent had the protection of the treasured clothing. He snorted coldly and urged his mind. 365 drops of serene heavy water flew out from the top of his head. He pointed again and chased after Xiao Han. Xiao Han didn't fly more than 100 feet before he was blocked by a layer of smoke. He knew that it was Lu Mainyang's trick. His heart was filled with hatred. But before he could find another way out, the serene heavy water that was chasing after him had already arrived. He suddenly felt as if his back was hit by a hammer. His vision went black and he fell from the sky with a cry. He fell to the ground and couldn't get up for a moment. He saw Zhang Yan striding over with a bone-chilling broadsword. He couldn't help but be scared out of his wits. He threatened, "Zhang Yan, I am a member of the Shao clan. If you kill me, aren't you afraid of the Shao clan's revenge?" Zhang Yan sneered. He raised the broadsword in his hand and swung it down. Wherever the broadsword passed, a head rolled down. Chapter 185. Since Xiao Han was killed on the spot, Zhang Yan naturally wouldn't let go of the remaining origin spirit's essence blood. He released the 9-absorption devil-taming slip and absorbed it. After the sea breeze blew, Xiao Han's corpse and clothes turned into ashes, leaving only a treasured robe and a sleeve on the ground. Zhang Yan spread out his mystic light and swept the 2 items away. Then, he turned into a rainbow and flew out of the island. On the way, he called out to Lu Mainyang and returned to the Dragon Country's ship. After entering the treasure pavilion, he sat on the jade couch and crossed his legs. He first took the treasured robe in his hand and looked at it carefully. After looking at it, he couldn't help but be surprised. The robe was originally purple, but now it had turned into a white robe. There was a pattern of latitude and longitude on the robe, and it was as smooth as water without a speck of dust. When he pinched it and released it, it returned to its original state without a single wrinkle. Zhang Yan remembered that he couldn't cut this treasured robe even with the beast-faced broadsword. Even when 365 drops of serene heavy water crashed into it, Xiao Han was still injured but not killed. If a strength path cultivator wore this robe, their battle prowess would undoubtedly be greatly increased when they fought. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This item is suitable for me." He looked at it twice more and saw a line of small words on the sleeve. There were 4 lines written on it: 7-star sun binding robe, burning in 100 smelting fires, not being able to escape the tribulation of man is the most difficult. When Zhang Yan saw this, he knew that the previous owner of this item was reminding those who came later to not rely on this item to cause trouble, or else it would affect their own cultivation and lead to a tribulation. It seemed that this robe had some history. It might not have been owned by the Shao clan before. With the style of the Xianmen clans, why would they write such a sentence? He smiled and kept the treasured robe. Then, He waved his hand and took out a sleeve. This sleeve was embroidered with stars. The rune lines were connected, and the pattern contained the mysteries of the stars. After Zhang Yan looked at it, he reached out his hand and pressed it. However, he was gently pushed away by a faintly discernible force and let out spiritual qi. He felt a wave of true sense faintly resisting him. He was overjoyed. He didn't expect that this sleeve pouch was actually a profound weapon. Profound artifacts were hard to come by. Even aristocratic families would not be able to take them out easily. This treasure was only given because Xiao Han's talent was outstanding and he was able to reach the third level of the mystic light realm before the age of 25. He wanted to undo his sleeves. He had to subdue this treasure no matter what. Thinking of this, he spouted several more wisps of spiritual energy. Sensing Zhang Yan's domineering spiritual energy, the wisp of true sense struggled a few times, and then, realizing that it couldn't resist, suddenly leaped into the air, as if it were about to flee. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "How can you escape?" He pointed. The sleeve couldn't help but tremble as it fell from the sky and returned to his hand. He was about to refine it with his spiritual energy. At this moment, footsteps could be heard coming from outside. He looked out from the restriction and saw Lu Mainyang standing outside the door. He waved his sleeve and opened the door. He stood up and greeted, "Demon King Lu, what brings you here? Please come in." Lu Mainyang entered the silent room. The two exchanged a few polite words before she sat down and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, I have a request this time." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Demon King Lu is too polite. If you have something to say, please say it. As long as it is within my capabilities, I will not refuse." From the moment Lu Mainyang blocked Xiao Han, she was on his side. Apart from this, she had no other way out. From now on, she was on his side. Therefore, if it wasn't a big request, he wouldn't hesitate to help. Lu Mainyang sighed and said, "My unfilial child, Yan Rong, was my daughter after all. I want to bury her body. Previously, I sealed her meridians and stopped the primordial spirit powder. Now, I want to send her to the world. However, there aren't many people in the sea, so we can only go to the inner sea to find a good family. However, this trip will take several months. My little brother and junior sister Jing will have to unlock their shackles and it will fall on you." Zhang Yan saw the slight exhaustion in her beautiful eyes. He knew that even though she killed her own flesh and blood, she was still sad. He smiled and said, "So it's about this. Fellow Taoist, please rest assured. I will go and see Tao Zhenren. But fellow Taoist, please don't be too sad, lest you hurt your cultivation." Lu Mainyang nodded and said, "Thank you for your help." She wiped the corner of her eyes, stood up and bowed before leaving. After sending Lu Mainyang off, the next 20 days were peaceful. Zhang Yan refined the sleeve pouch and the 7-star sun binding robe every day. Every 3 to 5 days, he would check on the progress of Gu Chu Er's technique. What surprised him was that even though Gu Chu Er's aptitude was not good, when she practiced the technique of Butian Pavilion, her progress was very fast. It seemed that she would soon find a jade elixir flower pond to open her meridians. He thought to himself, "I have been entrusted with a task, so I have to do it. Senior Pu Yuzi gave me the mountain river diagram that day, so I should find a good place to return it to his disciple. I can't do it half-heartedly. It seems that after this matter, I have to go to the flying boat immortal market of True Haiyu Temple." While he was thinking, he suddenly heard a rumbling sound from the opposite island. He unconsciously looked up and saw that halfway up the Black Mountain, there was a multicolored light shining down. It was like a stick stirring up the clouds, and the sound of beating drums could be heard. It was like thunder and lightning, one sound after another. Even people who didn't know the situation knew that something was breaking through the clouds. Zhang Yan took a look, and laughed loudly, "The time has come." He shook his robe, and turned into a ray of light. He went to the bottom of the Black Mountain, and took out a jade bottle that he had prepared earlier. He muttered something, and then said, Go. This jade bottle received the order, and as if it had a mind of its own, it spat out the stopper. At this moment, the sound in the sky was getting louder and louder, and it was so loud that it made one's eardrums swell. In the end, a ray of lightning streaked across, and the multicolored clouds turned into a torrential downpour. At this moment, the rumbling sound of thunder finally arrived. Zhang Yan looked carefully. Amidst the rainwater, there were a few droplets of nectar-like rainwater flowing down. Without the slightest hesitation, he carefully moved the jade bottle forward and collected them drop by drop. This rain fell once every 60 years, and every time it would last for 6 hours. Moreover, the 4 seasons water was mixed in, and if one's eyesight was slightly bad, they would have missed it. Naturally, he did not dare to be careless. However, at this moment, there happened to be a group of people passing by in the sky. After hearing the thunder, they came over. This group of people exuded an evil aura. In front of them, dozens of people were carrying a flying sedan draped in red with embroidered balls hanging on both sides. Behind them, there were hundreds of male and female attendants, all wearing tall hats and standing on yellow talismans. Their faces were stiff, and their skin was pale. At this moment, the curtain of the sedan was lifted, and a woman in colorful clothes could be vaguely seen sitting in it. Her eyes wandered, and she looked out a few times. Then, she waved at a girl. The girl walked up, and with her head lowered, she said, "Everyone, do you have any instructions? The spiritual qi here is very thick. There must be some kind of treasure being born for there to be an unusual phenomenon in the world." The girl glanced at the Dragon Country's ship, and raised her chin. She pouted and said, "Go and find out which fellow cultivator is here. If it's a mediocre rogue cultivator, just kill him." The little girl answered and got off the cloud, but she was stopped by a ray of light before she could get far. A burly man seemed to have said something to her, and not long after, she turned around and said with her head lowered, "Everyone, I'm afraid that you're not here. These 2 people have a background. One is the eldest disciple of Tao Zhenren, Guo Lai, and the other seems to be a disciple of Qinsang school." Hearing that, the girl giggled, and said, "Oh, they both have great backgrounds." They all had great backgrounds, and perfected Master Tao had always been protective of his own. This time, he's going to open a sect in the outer seas, and I'm going to attend the ceremony, so I can't not give him face. Qinsang school is even more powerful, and I heard that there are 10 grotto heavens guarding the mountain gate now. Even Shaoqing sect will be suppressed by them. I can't afford to offend them, so I'd better leave as soon as possible. She took a deep look at Zhang Yan, and then put down the curtain of the sedan. The 46 sedan bearers stepped on the cloud, and in an instant, they disappeared without a trace. From the beginning to the end, Zhang Yan didn't even glance over. He just focused on receiving the 4 marquises' water. When 6 hours passed, the clouds and rain stopped, and the sun shone again, he let out a shout, rolled up his sleeve, and put away the jade bottle. Then, he turned into a streak of light and returned to the ship. However, as soon as he landed on the deck, Guo Lai, who was already standing there, glared at him, and said, "You little brat, if I didn't stop those bastards for you, do you think you'd be so successful? You owe me again for this." Zhang Yan smiled, and cupped his hands, saying, "Thank you, fellow Taoist. I didn't take a closer look just now, may I know where these people came from?" Guo Lai chuckled, and said, "At this time, there is a sect in the southwest called the Corpse Cult, specializing in collecting the corpses of cultivators. This time, they probably heard about the appearance of the immortal mansion, so they came out to stir up trouble. If it wasn't for the fact that I haven't recovered from my injuries and lost my demon soul, with my temper, I would have long gone up and killed these people who are full of evil qi." Just as Zhang Yan was about to speak, he felt something, and looked up at the sky, and said in surprise, "I've been here for more than a month, and I haven't seen a single person. Today, it's lively. A few just left, and there are more coming." In the distance, 4 cultivators flew over on lights, and there were men and women among them. One of them, a young cultivator wearing a scarf on his head, saw Dragon Country's ship, and couldn't help but exclaim, and when he saw Guo Lai, he said in surprise, "Look, it's martial Uncle Guo." This shout was loud, and Zhang Yan also heard it clearly, and said with a smile, "So it's fellow Taoist Guo's fellow disciples." However, when Guo Lai saw them, his expression became weird, and he muttered, "These bastard brats, what trouble did they get into now?" After the four saw Guo Lai, their flying lights sped up, and after a few breaths, they landed on the deck and bowed together. "Greetings, martial uncle." Zhang Yan looked at these people, and he was slightly surprised. Apart from the cultivator wearing the scarf who was at the second level of the mystic light realm, the other three were all at the first level of the mystic light realm. He heard that among the four disciples under Tao Zhenren, apart from Guo Lai, who was a small golden core, the others were all golden core formation cultivators, and his disciples' cultivations weren't weak either. There weren't many Yuanying enlightened masters in Qinsang school who could teach their disciples like this. After the disciple with the scarf bowed, he shouted, "Martial uncle, Shen Minggu of Chongyue True Temple detains senior brother Shen and said that he wants us to use a spirit crane to exchange for him. Martial uncle, please help us." Guo Lai usually took care of the younger generation of disciples in the sect, and he had the same protective personality as Tao Zhenren, so he was willing to help out if there was any trouble. However, when he heard this, he grinned. Although he liked to fight, he had just recovered from his injuries, and his beast essence soul was destroyed. How could he fight someone? He had heard of this Shen Minggu's name before, and he was an expert among the younger generation of Chongyue True Temple. His yin-yang flying knife was also very strong, and even if he was at his peak, he wouldn't dare to say that he could win for sure, let alone now that he was half crippled. Seeing these people staring at him, Guo Lai felt a headache coming on. He patted his head and suddenly remembered something. He pointed at Zhang Yan and said, "You guys, find him." Chapter 186. Everyone has their own thoughts. After he spoke these words, Guo Lai seemed to be extremely impatient, and he waved his hand and actually didn't even look back as he left these juniors behind before turning around and returning to the treasure pavilion. However, on the way back, he glanced at Zhang Yan intentionally or unintentionally. The four disciples looked at each other, not understanding what was going on. They turned back to look at Zhang Yan and saw that his cultivation was at most similar to their own, so they thought Guo Lai was joking. Zhang Yan found it funny. He didn't think that a person like Guo Lai, who looked like a straightforward person, would secretly give them a look. Thinking that Guo Lai had something to say, he said to the four people, "Fellow Taoists, this ship is very spacious. You can choose a secluded courtyard to stay in." Finishing his words, he also flew into the treasure pavilion. Sure enough, not long after, he saw Guo Lai waiting for him in front of a bright hall. When Guo Lai saw him, he glared at him and said without any trace of politeness, "Brother Zhang, I have something to ask of you this time. Don't shirk it." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Guo must be joking. You've helped me many times before, so you can tell me what it is. Is it for your juniors?" Hearing this, Guo Lai immediately became happy and said, "That's right, these juniors are the disciples of my second junior brother, Xiao Jingcheng. You heard it just now, one of their fellow disciples was kidnapped and now they're begging me. As a senior of the sect, I can't turn a blind eye. It's just that I've lost the demon spirit and soul essence. If I were to fight Shen Minggu, I'm afraid I'd lose more than I win. Therefore, I'd like to ask brother to help me deal with this person. As long as brother agrees, then you'll be repaying the favor. When will the true moon leaf grass be refined into pill water, then you can return it to me." When Zhang Yan heard this, his interest was piqued. Guo Lai was a person who refused to admit defeat. If even he said that Shen Minggu was hard to deal with, then he must have some real ability. Zhang Yan asked, "What is Shen Minggu's cultivation level?" Guo Lai snickered and said, "The cultivation of that person named Shen isn't high, he's only at the third level of the mystic light realm, but his talent is outstanding and he has practiced the yin-yang li origin flying dagger to a very high level. I've fought him a few times, and because both sides are wary of each other, we're in a stalemate. However, I can see that this person is very skilled. Even if old Guo uses his true strength, he might not be able to beat him. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered as he gently smiled and said, since fellow Daoist has said so, it is obvious that this fellow Daoist Shen is an extremely powerful person. Now that he has told me the truth, aren't you afraid that I will beat a retreat? Guo Lai laughed loudly and looked at him meaningfully. He said, old brother Zhang, there is no need to be humble. I know your abilities. Even if you can't beat that person, you can still protect yourself. He had fought with Zhang Yan that day, so he knew that even if he hadn't fainted from exhaustion, he would most likely have lost. Most importantly, Zhang Yan was a sword cultivator. The strength of sword cultivators wasn't that their swords were sharp, but that they were fast. Even if they couldn't beat their opponent, they could leave as they pleased, and no one would be able to stop them. Furthermore, Xiaomu had mysteriously disappeared that day, and Zhang Yan hadn't told him what happened in the end. Guo Lai also understood that Xiaomu hadn't been able to gain the upper hand. He guessed that Zhang Yan still had some hidden tricks up his sleeves, so he was very confident in him. Zhang Yan pondered for a while and said, all right, I agree to this matter. However, with regards to the restrictions on fellow Daoist Lu and Demon King Jing, I will have to trouble you to deal with them when we meet Tao Jinren. Seeing that Zhang Yan had agreed, Guo Lai heaved a sigh of relief. He patted his chest and said, as long as you seek justice for my juniors and save my martial nephew Shen, I will take care of this matter. Zhang Yan nodded. Although Guo Lai was a straightforward person, he took his promises very seriously. It could be seen from the fact that he still had the guts to come back after being chased away by Xiaomu. The two talked for a while more before Zhang Yan said goodbye to Guo Lai and walked out the door. At this moment, there was no trace of anyone on the deck, so they must have entered the treasure pavilion. He withdrew a restriction talisman from his sleeve and inspected it silently. He knew that the four of them had entered the second level of the treasure pavilion, and they'd stopped at a courtyard in the southeast. Just as he was about to head over there, his expression changed and he stopped moving. He saw a ray of light flying over. When it saw him, it turned around and landed on the spot. It was the young cultivator with the square scarf on his head. He took a few steps forward and cupped his hands at Zhang Yan with a smile. He said, I was just about to look for fellow Daoist. I am Dai Huan, may I know your name? Zhang Yan cupped his hands in return and said, I am Zhang Yan. Dai Huan said, oh, but after thinking for a while, he hadn't heard of this name. However, he maintained his smile and said, it's an honor to meet you. After a pause, he cautiously asked, may I know, how do I address fellow Daoist Zhang and my martial uncle Guo? Zhang Yan waved his hand and said with a smile, fellow Daoist Guo and I are just acquaintances. We are just friends, there's no need to talk about seniority. Dai Huan's expression relaxed and became much more natural than before. Obviously, he saw that Zhang Yan's age and cultivation were not much different from his own, so he didn't want to treat him like an elder. When he heard this, he straightened his body and said, just now, martial uncle Guo asked fellow Daoist to help us, but I wonder if fellow Daoist has heard of Shinmingu? Zhang Yan shook his head and said with a smile, before meeting you, I have never heard of this person. Dai Huan was startled and frowned. He said, if that's the case, fellow Daoist must not know that Shinmingu was once chased by a monster king for several days, but he still managed to escape. Zhang Yan said frankly, indeed, I don't know. Dai Huan glanced at Zhang Yan and saw that his expression didn't change at all after hearing this. He didn't know whether it was because he really had the ability and didn't take it to heart, or because he didn't know the power of a monster king. Could this person really compete with Shinmingu? Dai Huan was deeply suspicious in his heart. He was also asked by a few senior and junior brothers and sisters to test Zhang Yan's background, but Zhang Yan gave him a feeling that he couldn't see through. After hesitating for a moment, he said, my junior brother Shen is now detained on Anong Island, and I don't know what kind of torture he's suffering. Our hearts are burning with anxiety. May I know when fellow Daoist Zhang will set off to rescue him? Anong Island, I know this place. Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, "This time I'm going to the D Celestial Market of Chongyuezhen Temple. It's on the way, so I'll take the flying boat there later and solve this matter on the way." Hearing his arrogant tone, Dai Huan was even more unwilling to believe it. He also didn't have the mood to continue chatting. After saying a few polite words, he hurriedly bid farewell and went to the backyard. Zhang Yan looked at his back and thought, although this Dai Huan's cultivation is similar to mine, he isn't a person with a firm will. He doesn't have the fierce fighting and killing aura of senior brother Ning. It's obvious that he hasn't been tempered enough. I heard that Tao Xinren was born as an abandoned child. When he was young, he used to beg on the road. Later, he got the chance to become an immortal and entered the mountain gate of Nanhua sect. He isn't from a Xianmen aristocratic family, but the method he used to teach these third-generation disciples is the way of an aristocratic family. If a Xianmen aristocratic family trained disciples, they would choose people with good aptitudes from within the sect. Then, they would be given cultivation methods, elixirs, immortals' cave celestial devices, and put in all their effort to train them. When their cultivation had reached a certain level, they would slowly be let out to gain experience. Even so, they would be protected by cultivators with profound cultivation to ensure that they wouldn't easily lose their lives. However, it was different for the line of master and disciple. Although they would choose disciples widely, except for a few disciples who had a solid foundation, the rest would only give you pointers on the essentials and wouldn't care about you on normal days. Whether you could succeed or not depended on your own fate and temperament. This method was like a big wave washing the sand. Therefore, the cultivators who could really fight their way out in this kind of environment were not simple. They were all people with a firm heart and extraordinary willpower. Therefore, below the core transformation cultivators in Qinsang school, those with high cultivation were mostly disciples of Xianmen aristocratic families. The line of master and disciple, on the other hand, had a lower cultivation level and fewer people. However, most of them were powerful figures, such as Ning Chongxian and Luo Qingyu. In the beginning, they were no different from Zhang Yan. They didn't have any teachers to deliberately look after them. They fought with all their might and finally stood out among their fellow apprentices. While Zhang Yan was walking, he suddenly heard the sound of thunder in the air. He saw a ferocious python scuttling in and rolling 3 times in front of him. When it stood up, it was a hideous-looking man dressed in armor. When he saw Zhang Yan, he hurriedly kowtowed and said, "Thank you, Master, for enlightening this lowly one." This lowly one was able to gain sentience and shed off this layer of evil skin. This lowly one is no longer muddle-headed. I hope that Master can accept this lowly one and let this lowly one serve you. This monster was the monster python that Zhang Yan threw the form transformation pill at that day. Today, it happened to transform and used the restrictions on the flying boat to avoid the lightning tribulation. It was so grateful that it shed tears. Zhang Yan chuckled and said, "It's not easy for you to be grateful. Since you're willing to follow me, I'll give you a name." He thought about it and said gently, "Zhang Pan, what do you think?" The monster was overjoyed. He bowed again and said loudly, "Thank you, Master, for giving me a name." When Dai Huan returned to the courtyard with a frown, a few people from the same sect surrounded him. A bulky male disciple asked hurriedly, "Senior martial brother, how was it? Did you find out anything?" Dai Huan raised his head and looked at them. He fell silent for a while before saying, "Although I can't tell how strong that fellow Taoist is, he's only at the mystic light realm. Even if he's a bit stronger than us." He smiled bitterly and shook his head. "The 4 of us together might not be a match for Shinminggu. What can he do by himself?" Another disciple curled his lips and said, "I told you long ago that martial Uncle Gua always does whatever he wants. He just said it casually, so how can we believe him?" Dai Huan glanced at him and said unhappily, "Junior martial brother, how can you talk bad about Master behind his back? Don't do it again." The disciple quickly lowered his head and didn't dare to say anything. Among these people, there was a female wearing a bright feather robe. She was very meticulous and thought, "When we were on the deck, I saw that Martial Uncle Guo was injured and couldn't fight. He probably didn't want to say it because he wanted to save face, so he used that fellow Daoist as a shield. I think that fellow Daoist's cultivation isn't weak, but to fight with that Shinminggu. She shook her head and obviously didn't think well of Zhang Yan. She thought for a while and said, Senior Martial Brother Dai, can you listen to Junior Martial Sister? Dai Huan never dared to underestimate this Junior Martial Sister, so he looked at her and said, Junior Martial Sister Wei, please speak. Junior Martial Sister Wei smiled and said, since Senior Martial Brother wants me to speak, I'll speak. We originally came to find Senior Martial Brother Di to seek justice for us, and bumping into Martial Uncle Guo was a pleasant surprise. Since he didn't want to do it himself and only ordered that fellow Daoist to help, I think he must have his reasons. As juniors, we don't need to think too much about it and just do as he said. But we also need to leave a way out. Why don't we send out a talisman first? If Senior Martial Brother D is nearby, he will definitely come here in 2 or 3 days. At that time, he will stand up for us and we won't need to trouble that fellow Daoist. Hearing this, Dai Huan nodded repeatedly and said, Junior Martial Sister Wei is right. That fellow Daoist doesn't know how powerful Shinminggu is. Even Martial Uncle Guo couldn't beat him. If he went up, he would just be throwing his life away in vain. Let me go and discuss with him. We'll wait here for a few days. If Senior Martial Brother Fu really doesn't come, it won't be too late to set off. Chapter 187. Clear Feather School. Although the Chi Dragon ship was called an ocean ship, it was actually a magical artifact. After being refined by Zhang Yan, he would be able to know what anyone was doing on the ship with a single sweep of his mind. However, those with high cultivation levels would naturally be able to sense it, so he wouldn't cause any trouble. However, these people's cultivation was close to his, so they didn't take any precautions. It was equivalent to opening the door and letting him in. Naturally, he could hear everything they said clearly. After listening for a long time, he let out a carefree laugh. Guolai had asked him to help because he owed Guolai a favor. Furthermore, he had heard that Shinminggu seemed to be an extraordinary person, so he had agreed to help Guolai. He wouldn't get any benefits himself, but if someone else helped him, that would be for the best, and he wouldn't have to stick his neck out. He thought to himself, these people seem to trust that Senior Martial Brother Fu very much. Since that's the case, I might as well wait for them for a few days. If that Senior Martial Brother Fu arrives in time, I'll be able to answer to fellow Daoist Gua. After making up his mind, he closed the restriction and sat cross-legged on the jade couch, continuing to refine the sleeve pouch and the 7-star sun-binding robe. After sending out the message, the 4 of them waited for 4 days. Every day, Dai Huan would send people out of the boat to take a look, but there was no sign of that Senior Martial Brother Fu. Just as they were waiting anxiously, on the morning of the 5th day, a clear whistle came from the sky and a black dot was approaching from afar. A disciple happened to see it and couldn't help but be excited and shouted, Senior Martial Brother Dai, Senior Martial Sister Wei, come out quickly, Senior Martial Brother Fu is here. When Dai Huan and the others heard the voice, they all turned into beams of light and flew out of the treasure pavilion. When they landed on the deck, they saw a goshawk with a wingspan of 15 feet. Its eyes were like lightning, and it had black feathers and a golden beak. Standing on its back was a middle-aged cultivator with deep eyes and thin lips. This man was tall and thin, and his skin was dark. When he looked at them, there was a sharp aura that felt like a knife cutting through them. Dai Huan and the other 3 disciples bowed and said, Greetings, Senior Martial Brother Fu. Senior Brother Fu seemed to be serious in speech and manner, and when faced with the greetings of his fellow disciples, he only nodded in greeting. He swept his gaze around and said in a low voice, Why did all of you urgently summon me with a talisman message? Where's Junior Brother Shen? How could he not be here? Did he cause trouble? Dai Huan hurriedly said, Senior Martial Brother, you've misunderstood. We had a conflict with the disciples of Chongyue True Temple in the Flying Boat Immortal Market. Junior Martial Brother Shen was captured by Shinminggu. Shinmingu even demanded him to release Shinmingu. He wanted us to go to Tranquil Hong Island and exchange spiritual birds for mounts. At this point, his tone was filled with anger. Senior Marshal Brother Fu's eyes flickered as he muttered, Shinmingu, huh? Ancestral Master's prediction was right. When we established our sect in the outer endless sea, this Chongyue True Temple really couldn't help but jump out. At this moment, a gust of sea breeze blew over, causing everyone's clothes to flutter. Dai Huan unintentionally glanced at it, and her eyes narrowed as she exclaimed, Senior Brother Fu, what happened to your right arm? Everyone looked up and exclaimed as well. This Senior Marshal Brother Fu's right sleeve was empty, and it was obvious that he was missing an arm. However, he acted as if nothing had happened and said, when I was chasing after that demonic crane, my arm was pecked off by it. I've already applied medicinal pills on my severed arm and kept it. I'll just reattach it later. There's no need for all of you to make a fuss about nothing. Dai Huan and the others all heaved a sigh of relief. Those who cultivated qi in the mystic sect had their bodies as their foundation. It was fine if they were injured, but if they were missing an arm or a leg, it would be difficult for them to attain the Great Tao in the future. Although this Senior Marshal Brother Fu was of the same generation as them in name, in reality, he was personally taught mystical techniques by Tao Jinren. No matter if it was cultivation or Tao techniques, he was much stronger than them, the third-generation disciples. Moreover, he had the highest hope of condensing an inner core within these 20 years. There was even a rumor in the sect that he was the true successor of ancestral master Tao Jinren. Senior Marshal Brother Fu looked around and said, I'll go rescue Junior Marshal Brother Shen. However, who owns this flying boat? Why are all of you here? Dai Huan hurriedly said, this flying boat belongs to a good friend of Senior Marshal Uncle Gua. We just happened to come across it. Senior Marshal Uncle Gua is currently cultivating in the quiet room. Does Senior Marshal Brother want to go and meet him? Hearing Guolai's name, Senior Marshal Brother Fu frowned slightly and said, I won't disturb Senior Marshal Uncle Gua's cultivation. However, since you've met Senior Marshal Uncle Gua, why didn't you ask for his help? Dai Huan and the Senior Marshal sister at the side looked at each other and said in a low voice, I've also told Senior Marshal Uncle about this. However, Senior Marshal Uncle seems to be in a difficult position. Originally, he wanted to ask his good friend to help him. Now that Senior Marshal Brother is here, there's no need to trouble this fellow Taoist. Hearing this, Senior Marshal Brother Fu suddenly shouted and said, I'm Fu Yuqing. May I invite fellow Taoist to come out and meet me? After saying that, he waved his hand and a snowflake-like white profound light flew out from his hand and flew towards the top of the treasure pavilion. However, before it could touch the restriction, a profound light of gold and fire flew out and intertwined with the white profound light, grinding it away. At the same time, a calm voice came out from the treasure pavilion. Fellow Taoist Fu is here as a guest. If you're interested, you can stay on this boat for a few days. I'm refining a magic treasure, so it's not convenient for me to come out and meet you. Senior Marshal Brother Fu frowned slightly and said in a low voice, is Senior Marshal Uncle Gua asking this person to rescue Junior Marshal Brother Shen on his behalf? Dai Huan nodded and said, that's right. Senior Marshal Brother Fu closed his eyes and then opened them again. He nodded slowly and said, Senior Marshal Uncle Gua's discerning eyes are correct. Dai Huan said in surprise, oh, Senior Marshal Brother, what's so special about this person? Senior Marshal Brother Fu let out a cold laugh and didn't say much to them. People like him had been through the tempering of battle formations for a long time and didn't need to meet. He only needed to identify his opponent's spiritual aura to know the rough situation and whether he could deal with him or not. However, after seeing that domineering profound light, he couldn't tell the depth of it. How could the other party be someone ordinary? He said in a low voice, even though the person Senior Marshal Uncle Gua invited is not weak, this matter has been handled wrongly. This is a matter of our Clear Feather sect, so how can we let others handle it? The 4 people present nodded. Only this Senior Marshal Brother Fu could reply to Guolai's intentions and he was standing on the side of reason. If it were anyone else who said such things about their elders, Dai Huan would definitely stand out and reprimand them. Dai Huan noticed that Senior Marshal Brother Fu said the 3 words, Clear Feather Sect, and he couldn't help but say with a trembling voice, Clear Feather Sect, could it be the sect Master Patriarch? He was so excited that he couldn't speak coherently. The others also came to their senses and looked at Senior Marshal Brother Fu with burning gazes. Clear Feather Sect was the name of the sect that Tao Zhenhong had decided on. Previously, when he had established the sect, he had taken care of the disciples and told them not to say the name of the sect even in private. But now, Senior Marshal Brother Fu had said it openly, unless he had obtained Tao Zhenhong's approval. Senior Marshal Brother Fu looked around and said solemnly, Junior Marshal Brothers, the Patriarch has already set the opening day of the sect on January 1st. From now on, when we travel outside, we can call ourselves Clear Feather Sect's disciples. I hope that Junior Marshal Brothers will work together and not bring shame to our sect's name. Hearing this, the faces of the 4 disciples, including Dai Huan, were filled with excitement, and they all agreed loudly in unison. Previously, although they had cultivation, they always felt that they were rootless duckweeds that followed the Patriarch around all day without a place to stand. Now that Tao Zhenren said the name, it was obvious that he had really made up his mind to protect this place. Senior Marshal Brother Fu looked at Dragon Country's big ship and said in a deep voice, Junior Marshal Brothers and Sisters, no matter how good this ship is, it belongs to someone else. Senior Marshal Uncle Gua is friends with the ship's owner, so he can stay here for a long time. How can you all stay here for long? Quickly pack up and follow me to save Junior Marshal Brother Shen. However, when he said this, Dai Huan and the others all looked troubled. Senior Marshal Brother Fu's face turned serious and he said, What's wrong? Dai Huan smiled bitterly and said, Senior Marshal Brother, our spirit birds and mounts all died in Shenmingu's hands. Even if we want to leave with Senior Marshal Brother, we can't do anything about it. Senior Marshal Brother Fu was silent for a while and said, That's because I didn't think it through. At this moment, there was a chirping sound in the air. A sharp-headed, red-beaked spirit pigeon flew over from nowhere and landed on his shoulder. Senior Marshal Brother Fu's expression didn't change. He took out a letter tube from the spirit pigeon's leg and casually opened the envelope. When he took out the letter paper and read it, his eyes gradually flickered and he said, This Shenmingu is really powerful. 5 days ago, he defeated Nanhua Sect's disciple Qiu Ju, Taihao School's disciple Chu Jiu, and Pingyuan Sect's disciple Dan Huizhen. Good, very good. If I defeat this person and save Junior Marshal Brother Shen, I will definitely be able to raise the prestige of our Clear Feather Sect. Dai Huan saw that he seemed to have the intention to move right now, so she quickly persuaded, Senior Marshal Brother Fu, please fix your arm first. It won't be too late to go after resting for a few days. Senior Marshal Brother Fu also knew that this would definitely be a tough battle and he couldn't be careless. After seriously considering it for a while, he nodded and took out an item from his sleeve and said, Give this to the ship's owner. When Dai Huan saw that it was a talisman with a vermilion bird carved on it, she couldn't help but be shocked and said, Senior Marshal Brother, isn't this the talisman that Master gave you? Why are you giving it to him? Senior Marshal Brother Fu shouted in a deep voice, I'm telling you to go, so go. Why do you need to ask so much? Dai Huan had no choice but to take the talisman and turn into a long rainbow as she flew towards Zhang Yan. At this moment, in the treasure pavilion, Zhang Yan stood in front of the window and saw every movement of these people clearly. Now that he saw this situation, he knew that this Senior Marshal Brother Fu wanted to borrow his ship to temporarily stay for a few days to fix his broken arm. However, he had a proud and aloof personality and wasn't willing to ask for it, so he gave this item to Shen Lian to show that they didn't owe each other anything. Zhang Yan smiled and said to Guo Lai, who was standing at the side, Fellow Taoist Guo, with you as my martial nephew, it seems that I don't need to do anything anymore. Guo Lai snorted and said, Fu Yuqing is very quiet. Back then when Master picked him up, I already didn't like him. Although he has some skills, Master Guo doesn't think that he can win. If he can't win against that guy with the surname Shen, I still need you, Brother Zhang, to step in. Zhang Yan looked at Guo Lai in surprise and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Guo, do you have no confidence in your own martial nephew?" Guo Lai said, "If this kid successfully cultivated masters, Zhen Wu fighting technique, I naturally have confidence. It's just that when this kid first cultivated Dao, he relied on his high aptitude and practiced 3 Dao techniques at the same time. He thought that he was invincible among his peers and was even proud of himself. Later, Master couldn't stand it anymore and gave him a few words of advice. Only then did he return to the right path, but he's still a dabbler. And this Shen Minggu from Chongyue True Temple has practiced the Yin Yang Li Yuan flying dagger since he was young. Along the way, he didn't have any distractions and has long practiced this set of techniques to the extreme. Unless he steps into the core transformation realm, he won't be able to improve any further. Therefore, in this battle, in my opinion, the odds are 6-4. Target equals _blank. Chapter 188. Target equals _blank. Chapter 49. Forcing with a blade. Hearing Guo Lai's words, Zhang Yan smiled and did not speak. Putting aside the truth of these words, he could hear a lot of jealousy in them. But thinking about it carefully, it was not without reason. Guo Lai claimed to have fought with Shen Ming many times, but they were all evenly matched. This Fu Yuqing was his martial nephew. If he won this time, wouldn't it show that he was useless? However, Zhang Yan also had his own plans. If Fu Yuqing were to be defeated, he would not hesitate to step forward and fight. Not only was the Chongyue True Temple the sharpening stone that he had chosen for himself, but he could also return the favor. Why not? At this time, Dai Huan rode on a light and arrived outside the treasure pavilion, looking at the vermilion bird token in his hand. He thought it was a pity. "I'm just staying here for a few days to reattach my broken arm. Senior brother, why did you give this away? Giving it to someone else and not thinking of your own senior brother." He raised his head and saw a fierce-looking man guarding the door, looking like a servant. He was a 3rd-generation disciple under Tao Zhenhong's tutelage, and he'd inherited the cultivation technique of the Southern Flower sect. So he was naturally able to discern with a single glance that this person was a demon that had taken human form. So he immediately became blunt and shouted, "Where's your master?" Zhang Pan was startled and answered honestly, "He is in the yard." Dai Huan flicked his sleeves and was about to step inside when Zhang Pan hurriedly stopped him. "Honorable guest, please tell me why you are here so I can go in and report." Dai Huan already had a knot in his heart, and hearing this, he became even more unhappy, thinking, "Why did a little demon like you come to stop me?" He snorted and secretly formed a technique, gathering qi in his eyes. Then he looked at Zhang Pan. This technique was passed down from Nanhua sect's demon subduing technique. It was used to subdue demons. When Zhang Pan made eye contact with that gaze, he felt 2 rays of light penetrate into his mind, and for some reason, he fell to the ground in a daze. Dai Huan laughed mockingly and stepped inside. Who would have thought that she had only taken half a step when she heard a cold snort by her ear? She felt a tightness in her chest and couldn't help but take 2 steps back. Zhang Pan also seemed to wake up with this sound. Dai Huan couldn't help but be shocked. She raised her head and saw Guo Lai walking out with a gloomy expression, and she couldn't help but be slightly anxious in her heart. She braced herself and bowed. "Martial uncle." Guo Lai's expression was very ugly as he scolded, "Bastard brat, do you think your sex methods are for you to bully people here? When you get back, use the saber sharpening incantation 100 times. If you miss one, I'll punish you 10-fold. Dai Huan shuddered. Once the saber sharpening incantation was activated, he would feel unbearable pain all over his body. It was a technique used by the sect to temper the disciples' willpower. Normally, 10 rounds would cause one to faint from the pain. Wouldn't 100 rounds be enough to kill him? However, he didn't dare to disobey. With a bitter expression, he said, "Yes, martial uncle." Guo Lai then cupped his hands towards the back and said, "Brother Zhang, for my sake, please spare him this once." It was impossible to tell whether Zhang Yan's voice was happy or angry as he said, "Fellow Taoist Dai, come in." Guo Lai fiercely glared at Dai Huan again and said, "You're on your own." Then he turned around and left. Dai Huan wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and walked into the courtyard. He saw Zhang Yan standing in front of the window with his back facing him, looking at something. He didn't know why, but he actually felt a little uneasy in his heart. He stepped forward and cupped his hands, saying, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, just now my sect's senior brother came. With him here, there's no need to trouble fellow Taoist this time. However, my senior brother still needs to borrow fellow Taoist's sea boat to recuperate for a few days, so he ordered me to deliver an item. I hope fellow Taoist will kindly accept it." Zhang Yan turned around. He took a look at the vermilion bird token and didn't stand on ceremony. With a wave of his hand, he put it away into his sleeve and said indifferently, "I already understand fellow Taoist Fu's intention. You guys are also going the same way, so I can give you a ride. Fellow Taoist Dai, please go and tell him to recuperate well." Dai Huan secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't want to stay any longer, so he cupped his hands and left. Zhang Yan thought, "This Zhang Pan will follow me from now on. If I'm not here, this sea boat will still need his care. It's just that his cultivation is too low and he can't even control the sea boat, so he can only do some manual work. Why don't I teach him a technique? I originally wanted to find an opportunity, but now is just the right time." Thinking of this, he called out, "Zhang Pan, come in." Outside the door, Zhang Pan heard this and hurriedly walked in with his head lowered. There was some fear on his face as he said, "Master, Zhang Yan interrupted him and said, "Listen carefully. If you don't want to be bullied in the future, then practice the technique I teach you. Listen carefully." Zhang Pan was startled at first, but then he was overjoyed. He hurriedly pricked up his ears and listened attentively, not daring to miss a single word. Zhang Yan's lips moved as he repeated the first half of the technique on the true scroll of the hornless dragon 5 times. Seeing that Zhang Pan had memorized it, he finally stopped and said, "This technique can be considered a profound technique. Go back and practice it well. Whether you can master it or not will depend on your own luck." Zhang Pan hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed, crying, "Zhang Pan, thanks master. I can't repay the kindness of passing on this technique even with my life." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "Practice by yourself. If you have any questions, come and ask me again." When he finished speaking, he turned into a ray of light and returned to the main pavilion. He sat on the jade chair and activated the talisman. The Dragon Country's ship rose into the air and flew towards Hong An Island. A few days later, a misty light appeared in his quiet room. After refining it for a long time, the 7-star sun binding robe was completed. With a whistling sound, it flew out from the treasure light and turned into a black Taoist robe that spread out in the air. There were runes and lines on the robe, as well as the sun, moon, and stars, faintly hiding the workings of the heavens. After the robe floated for a while, it retracted its light and fell onto Zhang Yan's body, wrapping around him. Zhang Yan stretched his arms and legs and found that the robe fit him perfectly. Moreover, it looked the same as the Taoist robe he was wearing before. Even if Xiao Han were to come back to life, he wouldn't be able to see through it. He couldn't help but nod in satisfaction. With the protection of this treasured robe and his body that was stronger than steel, there was no one in the same generation who could hurt him. The ship traveled in the northwest direction for another 7 to 8 days. On this day, it was raining cats and dogs. Dai Huan and the others looked out from the restriction and saw that the sea was turbulent and the waves were towering. However, they were safe and sound here, without the slightest ripple. Dai Huan couldn't help but say enviously, "Senior Marshal Brother Fu, we usually ride cranes and eagles in the wind and rain. Sometimes, we have to avoid the evil clouds as soon as we see them, lest we get sucked into them. But with this ship in hand, we don't have to worry about that. Senior Marshal Uncle Guo really has a good eye. I wonder how he got to know this fellow Taoist Zhang." Fu Yuqing snorted coldly and said, "The founding master set the rule of riding spirit birds to cross the sea to train the disciples' temperament. We are just a temporary measure here. You must not be greedy for a moment of comfort and slack off. Dai Huan hurriedly said in a low voice, yes, Senior Marshal Brother. 4 hours later, when it was almost noon, the sky was finally clear and the clouds had dispersed. The sun was still shining brightly and they could see a few islands dotting the sea from afar. Junior Marshal Sister Wei, who was standing at the side, said, Senior Marshal Brother, there is someone blocking the way in front. Looking at their clothes, they must have reached the territory of Chongyue True Temple. Fu Yuqing nodded and said to Dai Huan, Junior Marshal Brother Dai, take my visitation card and go. Dai Huan replied, yes. He stood up and left the flying ship. This Chongyue True Temple occupied a sea province on the sea and also occupied more than 80 spiritual islands and scattered reefs. It had more than 1,000 disciples and was one of the big sects in the outer sea. This place was called Oxhorn Island and it was one of the outermost islands. There were people on the island who had already noticed this ship, so they went forward to stop it. When they saw Dai Huan coming out, a conveyance light stopped in front of him and shouted, Who are you? How dare you trespass on my Oxhorn Island? Dai Huan took a closer look and saw that it was a young man in blue who had a pair of sharp eyes like an eagle. He carefully said, I'm from Clear Feather Sect and I'm under the order of my Senior Marshal Brother Fu Yuqing to send a visitation card and wish to meet with fellow Taoist Shinminggu. This young man in blue had never heard of Clear Feather Sect, but he had heard of Fu Yuqing's name. He had a strange expression and took a look at the visitation card. He sneered in his heart. Looking at the handwriting, it was like a dragon and a snake, sharp and glaring, filled with murderous intent. How was this a visitation card? It was clearly a challenge card. When he thought of the rumors from the past 2 days, he instantly understood. He thought to himself, I heard that Senior Marshal Brother Shin defeated 2 disciples from the big sects in a row and was praised by a few old fellows. If this goes on, he will overshadow me sooner or later. I heard that this Fu Yuqing is an outstanding talent among the 3 generations of disciples under Tao Zhenhong. If I take him down, I will definitely be able to suppress his prestige. I've been looked down upon by those old fellows. The young man in blue rolled his eyes and waved at Dai Huan. He smiled and said, Come with me. Dai Huan did not suspect anything and followed him. After walking for a short distance, the young man suddenly turned around and smiled at him. He opened a wooden box in his hand and a black gas flew out from it. He did not know why, but when he was hit by the black gas, he felt dizzy and fainted. The young man grabbed his collar and laughed before flying toward Dragon Country's flying ship. When he got close, he threw Dai Huan onto the ship and pointed with his finger. A flying knife appeared out of nowhere and stuck to Dai Huan's throat. He shouted, Which arrogant guy wants to fight with my Senior Marshal Brother Shen? A rainbow light flew out and Fu Yuqing landed in front of him. He said with a livid expression, It's me. Who are you and why are you holding my Junior Marshal Brother hostage? The young man in blue laughed and said, Listen well, I'm Su Kuo, a true disciple of Chongyue True Temple. I heard that you, Fu Yuqing, want to meet my Senior Marshal Brother Shen, so I came here. If you can defeat me, it won't be too late to meet him. Fu Yuqing's expression changed and his expression became serious. He said, You're Su Kuo. Su Kuo saw that Fu Yuqing seemed to have heard of him and immediately became happy. He said, Not bad, not bad. It's me. Fu Yuqing said with a sullen expression, Although I also want to meet you, my Junior Marshal Brother is in Shinminggu's hands. If you can make the decision, why can't I fight you? Su Kuo laughed and waved his hand. He said, Don't talk nonsense. Today, you have to fight whether you want to or not. Otherwise, I'll kill your fellow disciple. He pointed with his finger and the flying knife instantly cut into half of Dai Huan's neck. Blood instantly flowed. Chapter 189. Target equals, _blank, Chapter 50 Hoarding rare goods. When Fu Yuqing saw Su Kuo suddenly making a move, he was both shocked and angered, and he shouted, Stop. Senior Marshal Sister Wei and the others who followed behind him also exclaimed, and their faces were filled with anger. But Su Qiu didn't put away his saber. He crossed his arms and said with a smile, "If you can defeat me, I will let him go, but if you can't defeat me, you will be my defeated opponent." "What use do I have for him?" Fu Yuqing stared at him and said heavily, "Fine. Don't involve others in our battle. Life and death will be up to fate." Su Qiu chuckled and didn't say anything. His body trembled, and a white light flew out from his back, aiming straight for Fu Yuqing's head. When he looked closely, he realized that this white light was actually a white saber that seemed to have solidified. Fu Yuqing took a step back, and just happened to avoid the sharp edge. He shouted in a low voice, and a ball of mysterious light rose from his back, condensing into a large yellow hand. It slapped the saber with its fingers, and with a muffled sound, the saber was smashed into a ball of dissipating essence qi. But before he could counterattack, Su Qiu pointed with his hand, and another saber came down. Fu Yuqing had fought with the disciples of Chongyue True Temple before, so he didn't panic. With a calm expression, he controlled the large hand, and with the back of his hand, he blocked the flying saber, preventing it from coming down. While he was doing this, Su Qiu didn't stay idle either. He formed an incantation, and the ball of white qi that had dissipated earlier spun on the spot, condensing into a white saber again, and slashed down again. But that wasn't the end. From all directions in the sky, flying sabers appeared one after another. There were a total of 7 flying sabers, and they danced around Fu Yuqing like snowflakes. Fu Yuqing shouted loudly, and the muddy yellow hand expanded out of thin air. It blocked left and right, and all the flying daggers were blocked outside the circle of light. When Su Qiu arrived, Zhang Yan was also alarmed, but he didn't go out, and just watched coldly from the side. He carefully inspected the cultivation techniques of the two, and from the looks of it, Fu Yuqing and Guo Lai's cultivation techniques were very different. However, although Guo Lai was the eldest disciple of Tao Zhenren, he cultivated the cultivation technique of the Southern Flower sect. It was said that after Tao Zhenren broke out of the sect, he obtained immortal fate, and that mystic light hand was probably the Tao technique he learned later on. On the other hand, Su Qiu's attack was like a torrential storm, wide and unrestrained. It was completely different from Bei Gonghao's sinister and vicious style. Moreover, Bei Gonghao had only mastered 5 flying daggers, but this person had used 7. Who knew what other tricks he had up his sleeve? Zhang Yan pondered for a moment, then took out a smooth jade from his sleeve and called out, "Is fellow Taoist Bei Gong here?" Hearing his voice, a wisp of yuan spirit floated up from the jade. However, Bei Gong Bo was a cultivator at the 3rd rank of the mystic light realm after all, so much time had passed. After, Lai, Yi, and Bei Gonghao looked in that direction, and smiled bitterly. "Brother, how did you offend this brat?" Bei Gonghao looked in that direction, and he smiled bitterly. "Brother, how did you offend this brat?" Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. "Oh. Could it be that this person has some background?" Bei Gonghao spoke hesitantly. "This person is the grandson of our Chongyuezhen Temple's sect master. His father is an elder of the demon sect. This kid's cultivation is not weak, but that's not all. I've heard that he has a powerful magical treasure, and his enemies often die mysteriously. It's just that no one has ever seen it. Although he's using the Liuan flying dagger to fight, it's not his true skill." When Zhang Yan heard this, the words, "rare goods," appeared in his mind. His eyes flashed, and he smiled. Since this person has such a background, he must have a lot of Renkue water essence on him. Bei Gonghao was startled, and he thought for a while before nodding slowly. He said with certainty, "Of course, I have a lot. To be honest, although I am an elder, I am not as good as the sect master's family. Take the yin-yang origin leaving flying saber for example, we need to use it with mist, and the number of saber strikes we can practice is much lower than theirs." Zhang Yan laughed and said, "Originally, I wanted to use the spirit shell to go to the celestial market to buy the Renkue water essence qi. Now that this person is here, why do I need to go far away? As long as I capture this person, what's there to worry about? Bei Gonghao thought for a while. The most outstanding disciples of Chongyue True Temple were the two surnames Shen and Su. They also relied on these two families to control the other families and support the entire sect. This Su Qiu's identity was not simple. If Zhang Yan proposed to exchange the Ren Kue water essence for Su Qiu, this matter would most likely succeed. He secretly smiled bitterly. But next, he would also have to face the thunderous revenge of Chongyue True Temple, right? He could only hope that Su Qiu could escape this disaster, or else he would be buried with him. At this moment, the two of them had been fighting for no less than half an hour. During this period, Su Qiu had been the main attacker, and Fu Yuqing had been passively defending. Although Su Qiu's face was carefree, and there was not the slightest trace of anxiety, he knew that he was also forced into a difficult situation. Although the 7 flying sabers were sharp, they could not penetrate his defense. Fu Yuqing had been suppressed for a long time, but he had been secretly accumulating strength. Once his momentum weakened, his counterattack would probably come like a blanket. However, his tactics did not stop here. He hooked the little finger of his left hand, and a trace of cunning appeared in his eyes. A black saber silently appeared behind Fu Yuqing, and it slashed down towards the side of his back that was completely unguarded. This was a Yin origin saber. The Yang saber of the origin Yin Yang flying saber walked on the righteous path, whereas the Yin saber walked on the devious path. They were like the art of war, but it was impossible to achieve the reversal of Yin and Yang until one's core was formed, and it lacked a type of variation. However, ordinary cultivators were usually unable to resist such an attack. When this saber silently slashed over, Fu Yuqing seemed as if he was completely unaware, and he still utilized the enormous hand made of dark light to deal with the 7 Yang sabers that ceaselessly slashed down before him. Right when he was about to perish beneath the saber, a clear cry sounded out, and then a demonic crane that was an entire 6m tall appeared by his side. It flapped its wings and slapped the black saber into pieces, causing it to transform into a strand of black chi that drifted away. The corners of Fu Yuqing's mouth puckered. After he cultivated the Sky-Earth Dragon capturing palm, he was practically fearless when facing an enemy head-on. But when he fought another, he noticed that his side of his back had always been an extremely huge flaw, and if he didn't repair it, it would sooner or later become a flaw. Because of this, he'd walked through many desolate places, and not long ago, he'd paid the price of losing an arm to capture this demonic crane and use it to guard the flaw on his side of his back. At this moment, he was only at the profound light realm, and he didn't have any flaws. Moreover, he hadn't controlled this demonic crane for a long time, so he wasn't able to control it as he pleased. One day, when he completely subdued it, he would be able to attack and defend at will, and it would be completely different from before. This was the source of his confidence in going against Shinminggu. Fu Yuqing's face was expressionless as he fought steadily and dealt with every move that came his way. He knew that he didn't have to be greedy for quick victory, and he only had to defend steadily. Once Su Qiu's strength was exhausted, it would be the time for him to counterattack. After successively slashing over 100 times, Su Qiu noticed that he was still unable to defeat his opponent, and he felt anxious in his heart. This Fu Yuqing really does have some ability. I'll lose for sure once he's free. Looks like I have to use that treasure in the end to decide the outcome of the battle. However, not a single one of the people here can be left alive. He snorted and suddenly jumped out of the circle. He took out a wooden box, and with a flick of his thumb, he opened the cover. A black aura that was as black as ink flew out, and he pointed his finger downwards. This black aura headed straight for Fu Yuqing. Fu Yuqing was already on guard when he saw Su Qiu's movement. Now that he saw it, he calmly threw out the demon subduing circle, and with a long cry, the ink feather eagle appeared under his feet. The eagle was a mutated species, so its speed was extremely fast. With a flap of its wings, it was able to bring Su Qiu dozens of feet away. However, the black aura followed him, and no matter where he flew to, it was like a ghost that wouldn't leave. He couldn't shake it off. When Su Qiu saw this, his eyelids twitched. This was also the first time he saw someone actually able to dodge his transcendent artifact. Seeing that Fu Yuqing was being chased by the black aura, Su Qiuo used his origin-flowing flying daggers to intercept him from the front and back, but because the distance was too far, he couldn't reach Fu Yuqing. He instantly gnashed his teeth, and wanted nothing more than to bite Fu Yuqing to death. This Fu Yuqing was also a disciple personally taught by Tao Zhenhong, and the spirit bird under his feet was meant to deal with the peerlessly fast sword escape of sword cultivators, so how could Su Qiuo's flying daggers catch up to him? Su Qiuo's eyes darted around a few times, and he immediately came up with a plan. He suddenly shouted, "Fu Yuqing, you can slowly escape. Let's see how many of your fellow disciples can dodge my flying daggers." After saying that, he flicked his finger, and the dagger flashed. Blood burst forth, and Dai Huan's head was instantly chopped off. Another 7 white daggers flew up and slashed at the other 3 people. Senior Sister Wei and the others had weaker cultivations, and they knew that they had no chance of winning, so they hurriedly turned into rays of light and flew straight toward the treasure pavilion, hoping to rely on the restrictions to avoid these flying daggers. When Fu Yuqing saw Dai Huan die in front of him, he instantly became so furious that his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He let out a furious roar, and the movement of his spirit eagle couldn't help but pause for a moment. He was only delayed for a moment, and the black aura flew up and wrapped around his face. He only felt his mind become dizzy, and his body swayed before he fell off the spirit eagle's back. When Su Qiuo saw this, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. He abandoned Senior Sister Wei and the others, and drove his flying daggers to take Fu Yuqing's head. However, right at this moment, 7 bright sword rays shot out from the horizontal, and every single one of them accurately slashed at the flying daggers, causing them to transform into a ball of essence at almost the same time. Su Qiuo was caught unprepared by the sudden change, and just as he was about to make a hand seal to gather these flying daggers, he was caught off guard by another sword ray. This time, his expression changed, and he raised his hand to slap out a small black flag to block in front of him. However, the moment this sword ray was blocked, the air trembled, and another sword ray split off and slashed at him again. It actually didn't give him the slightest chance to catch his breath. At this critical moment, he let out a loud roar, and the Origin Li Yin saber flew out from an unknown place to slash at this sword ray, blocking it. However, to his horror, this sword pellet trembled, and suddenly, another sword ray split off and came for him. In a hurry, he couldn't care about anything else, and he only had time to use the wooden box in his hand to block in front of him. With a crack, the wooden box that contained the black qi was actually slashed into 2, and the sword's momentum didn't stop there. It continued to descend, and with a qi sound, it split open a wound from his shoulder to his chest on his upper body. Fresh blood gushed out like a fountain, and he also let out a miserable cry before falling down. A flight light flashed by, and he was enveloped in it. Then, it landed in the treasure pavilion. Zhang Yan revealed himself, and he threw the half-dead Su Qiuo on the ground. With a wave of his sleeve, a few golden talisman flew out and stuck to his forehead, forelimbs, and navel, sealing his halogen sea of qi. Zhang Yan shook both of his sleeves, and he looked down from above. With a slight smile, he said, "With you in my hands, there's no need to go forward. I can just sit and wait for that Shinming to come." Chapter 190. Target equals _blank. Chapter 51. Parry Li Goshen Feng. After Zhang Yan subdued Su Qiuo, he took his sleeve bag and searched it carefully. Just as he expected, this person had a lot of Ren Kuei water essence on him. It filled up a small bottle. There were at least 100 drops, which made him very happy. He thought to himself, this Su Qiuo is only an outer disciple of the Su clan, yet he has so much water essence on him. That Shin Minggu is even more famous, and he is a member of the Shin clan, so he must have more water essence on him than Su Qiuo. Although he had planned to go to the flying boat's celestial market to buy the water essence, he didn't have much hope. One must know that this object was used by Chong Yuzhenguan to cast the yin-yang flying dagger of Li Yuan. Even if they sold it, it could be assumed that there wouldn't be much of it. Compared to the amount he needed, it would be a drop in the bucket. Perhaps it would be better to directly plunder the Shen and Su families. Once he had collected enough of the water essence of the 9 Kuei, he could begin to cultivate the water element true light of the Taishian true light. Although he did not know how powerful it was, the Taishian sect was an ancient Xianmen sect, so this method should not be simple. While Zhang Yan was deep in thought, Su Qiu also slowly woke up. He had been injured by Zhang Yan's sword, and his injuries were quite severe. Luckily, he was a mystic light realm cultivator, and as long as the spirit qi in his chest didn't scatter and he didn't lose any energy, he would be able to recover after taking some spirit medicine. But now that Zhang Yan had used a talisman to seal his meridians, he was unable to move. He could only lie there and force himself to speak. "Fellow Taoist, I've observed your technique, and it doesn't seem to be the same as Tao Jinhong's. Why do you have to make things difficult for me? If you're willing to let me go, I'll naturally reward you." Zhang Yan was sitting on the couch. Hearing this, he looked down and smiled. "What benefits do you have for me?" Su Qiu had just killed Dai Huan, so he was extremely afraid that Zhang Yan would make him pay for it with his life. Seeing that Zhang Yan's tone seemed to be open to negotiation, he hurriedly said, "The rare treasures of the outer endless sea, celestial birds and spiritual beasts, cultivation methods and spirit pills, as long as you can name them, I will find a way to get them for you." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and said, "If I want 1,000 drops of 9th Kuei water essence from your sect, would you be willing to give it to me?" Su Qiu was startled for a moment, then he said in an extremely heroic voice, 1,000 drops of water essence is nothing. As long as you let me go, I'm willing to give you 3,000 drops of water essence. As soon as he said this, Zhang Yan was really shocked. He looked at Su Qiu and saw that he didn't seem to be joking. He narrowed his eyes and said, "All right, write a letter and I will ask someone to send it to Chongyuezhen Temple. I will give you 3,000 drops of water essence as ransom. What do you think?" Su Qiu was originally nervous, but when he heard this, his face lit up with joy, as if he was afraid that Zhang Yan would go back on his word. He hurriedly agreed, then with a bitter face, he said, "Also, please forgive me and help me treat my injuries." Zhang Yan smiled and with a wave of his hand, he took away the talisman on Su Qiu's right arm. With a flip of his palm, he helped Su Qiu to sit up. He took out a brush and ink from his sleeve and handed it to him. Then, he took out a bottle of pills and said, "This is a pill for external application. Apply it on your injuries." Although Su Qiu came out with an empty hand and could easily take down the talisman, under Zhang Yan's eyes, he didn't dare to make any unnecessary movements. He slowly applied the medicine on his body. He felt a cool sensation coming from his injuries. The pain he was feeling instantly disappeared, and the wounds immediately scabbed and closed. He saw that the medicinal effect of the medicinal pill Zhang Yan took out was extraordinary, and it was extremely rare. If Zhang Yan wanted to kill him, then there was no need for such a medicinal pill. His heart couldn't help but calm down, and he took out a brush and ink. Not long after, he wrote a letter. He picked up the letter and said, "Fellow Taoist, take this letter and send it to the nearby island. Someone will definitely come with the water essence in exchange for my return later." But in his heart, he said, "After I escape, I'll come back and deal with all of you. Won't I still be able to get back what I gave you?" Zhang Yan took the letter and read it carefully. The words were short and there were only a few sentences. Obviously, there was no trick. He looked at Su Qiu and thought, what a pity. If this person didn't kill Dai Huan, I could make the decision to exchange him. But I can't do it now. Otherwise, how can I speak for fellow Taoist Lu and Jing in front of Tao Jinren? But with this person in hand, after I send this letter, I can lure Shen Minggu over and capture him. I believe I can get the water essence in my hands. As for the revenge of Chongyue True Temple, he wasn't worried at all. With Tao Jinren's eldest disciple and his juniors here, and this matter was done on their behalf, it was impossible for Tao Jinren to just stand by and watch. He kept the letter and suddenly thought of something. He said, "Let me ask you, what is the black gas that you used to injure Fu Yuqing?" Su Qiu's expression was unnatural. He said, "That was a treasure bestowed by my father. I only know that it's always successful against enemies and has no solution to injuring people. But its origin? I don't know." He really didn't know what this magic treasure was. It was just that his father had told him that anyone who saw the true appearance of this treasure had to be killed to avoid leaving behind any future troubles. But now that he had been captured, it was more important to save his life. He could only think of a way to escape first before he could think of anything else. At this time, on the other side of the treasure pavilion, Senior Marshal Sister Wei and the others were frowning. They fished the unconscious Fu Yuqing out of the sea and tried all kinds of methods, but they couldn't wake him up. In the end, they brought him to Guolai, but he was also helpless. A disciple said anxiously, "This Su Qiu used some evil method to make Senior Marshal Brother Fu unconscious." Another disciple also said angrily, "This person dared to kill Senior Marshal Brother Dai. This is unforgivable." The first disciple cupped his hands at Guolai and said, "Su Qiu must have a cure. Marshal Uncle Gua, why don't you ask Marshal Uncle Gua to come out and let fellow Taoist Zhang hand over Su Qiu to us?" Guolai snorted and said, "With my temper, Su Qiu should be killed to pay for Dai Huan's life. But just now, Brother Zhang saved the three of you and that Fu brat's life. That person was also captured by him, so how can I ask him to do that?" Senior Marshal Sister Wei sighed and said, "Marshal Uncle Gua, I think that fellow Taoist Zhang is a reasonable person. We won't ask him to do anything to Su Qiu, just ask him to tell us a way to save Senior Marshal Brother Fu. I'm sure he won't refuse." Guolai's expression changed. He slapped his thigh and said, "That makes sense, but I don't know what Brother Zhang is planning, so it's not convenient for me to do anything. Marshal Niece Wei, you've always been smart, so I'll leave this matter to you." Senior Marshal Sister Wei hurriedly said, "Li Hua should share the worries of fellow disciples and teachers." After Guolai gave her a few more instructions, she left the courtyard and went to the top floor of the treasure pavilion. She saw Zhang Pan standing guard at the door. She didn't have Dai Huan's superior temperament, and she came with a request, so she spoke in a rather humble manner. After Zhang Pan went in to report, he came out not long after and said, "Master, please come in." Senior Marshal Sister Wei thanked him and stepped inside. After passing through 3 courtyards, she arrived at an alchemy room. Seeing Zhang Yan sitting on a jade couch, she quickly bowed and said, "My daughter Wei Lihua greets fellow Taoist Zhang." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, why have you come?" Wei Lihua sighed and said, "It's because Senior Marshal Brother Fu was hit by Su Qiu's magic treasure and is still unconscious. I hope that fellow Taoist can ask Su Qiu if he has a way to save him." Zhang Yan said, "I did ask about this, but Su Qiu once said that the magic treasure can't be cured, so I'm afraid that I won't be able to get an answer." When Wei Lihua heard this, she couldn't help but look disappointed. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Wei, you don't have to worry. I'll find someone to investigate. Maybe there's a way to save him." He shouted, "Zhang Ju, come out." As soon as he said this, Mountain River Child came out and bowed. "Master, what are your orders?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You're experienced and knowledgeable. Go take a look at fellow Taoist Fu and see what exactly injured him." When Wei Lihua saw Zhang Ju appear out of thin air, she initially thought that this Zhang Yan had taken his servant away with a magic treasure, so she didn't think much of it. However, after taking a few looks, she was shocked and thought to herself, "This boy is a spirit. He doesn't have any flesh or blood, but he's like a living person. He's clearly a treasure spirit. Even big sects don't have many of such magic treasures, but this fellow Taoist Zhang can actually carry one around with him. He must have an extraordinary background. We've all underestimated him." Since he was a magic treasure spirit, she didn't dare to be careless. She hurriedly said, "Celestial Child, please come with me." Mountain River Child waved his hand and said, "No need." With a shake of his body, he disappeared without a trace. After waiting for a while, he returned to the room and reported, "Master, I already know why that person fell unconscious. His heart acupoint was blocked by something. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. A technique that could block the heart acupoint was obviously a technique of the devil path. He thought about Su Qiu's background and understood. He said, "Can you see what it is?" Zhang Ju replied, "Master, this qi is called perily godly wind. It's made by collecting a drop of blood essence from the heart tips of 99 dragon seeds, and then extracting the soul essence of thousands of people, mixed with the tears of mermaids, the eyes of nobles, and the like. Once this qi is released, no matter how magic treasures or mystical techniques you use, you can't resist it. The only way to escape is to avoid it. Although this thing can melt under the scorching sun for half a day, once it touches your body, it will immediately block the acupoint of your heart and confuse your mind." When he said this, Wei Lihua covered her chest and exclaimed, "This thing is so powerful and evil. Is there a way to expel it?" Zhang Ju nodded and said, "Of course there is. In order to avoid the sun, this qi is curled up in the heart acupoint of this talisman Taoist. It can wait for 81 days. If this talisman Taoist has not lost his mind, he will wake up. Or we can ask a heavenly abode to help and use the true fire in his chest to circulate through the acupoint and force it out. Naturally, he will be saved." Wei Lihua's beautiful face changed slightly. Even Tao Zhenhong was only a Yuanying Zhenren, so he could not save Fu Yuqing. Furthermore, this thing was so evil. If they really waited for so many days, who knew what would happen in the end? She could tell from Zhang Ju's words that it was extremely dangerous. When she thought of this, a trace of worry could not help but float up between her brows. At this moment, the two of them heard a shout from outside the sea boat, "The people inside, get out! What have you done to senior brother Su? Do you know that he is a disciple of Chongyue True Temple? Quickly let him out, don't make a mistake." Zhang Yan smiled to himself and said, "The messenger is here." Chapter 191. Target equals _blank Hong An Island, Qi Jin Palace. Friendly fight. In the main hall, a man in white with his hair in a bun was sitting upright. He was looking at the letter in his hand with his eyebrows raised. His face was delicate and pale, but his nose was hooked and his eyes were bright. Even though he was thin and small, he still stood up straight. This person was the direct disciple of Chongyue Jin Temple, Shinminggu. He snorted and threw the letter in his hand on the table. He sneered, "This Su Qiu's ability is not good enough. He asked someone to capture him, but he wants me to go and take care of this for him. How ridiculous." Sitting below him was a cultivator with short eyebrows and a big nose. He was his junior disciple, Shin Kong. He saw that Shinminggu seemed to be quite impatient and hurriedly said, "After the elders of Su learned of this, they have come to ask about it. Senior disciple, please consider carefully." Shinminggu smiled disdainfully, "This Zhang Yan challenged me. If I don't go, I'm afraid they will say that I didn't help and deliberately cause the death of my fellow disciple." Shin Song carefully asked, "Then senior disciple, are you going or not?" Shinminggu lowered his head to look at the letter. A faint smile appeared on his lips as he said, "I've met with the direct disciples of the Nanhua sect and the Tai Hao sect these days. They're only a so-so. I'll write a letter later. Send it to that Zhang Yan. I want to see what's so great about the disciples of the Yingcang sect." Shin Song consulted, "Then, should I bring the 3,000 drops of Renkue water essence that Zhang Yan asked for?" Shinminggu waved his hand and said, "Yes. Su Qiu is willing to pay, so I will bring it for him. Otherwise, Su clan will say that I have ulterior motives. Are you afraid that they can't pay?" Shin Song thought for a while and said, "I heard that this person and Tao Zhenren's disciples are now together. A few days ago, I caught that Shin Yan. Senior disciple is going now. I'm afraid it's a trap." Shinminggu said indifferently, "Junior martial brother is worrying too much. The letter clearly states that they asked me to meet in front of Oxhorn Island. This island is the territory of my Chongyue Jin Temple. Do you think I'm afraid of them playing some tricks? Shen Song thought carefully. He felt that as long as he was careful, there wouldn't be any accidents. However, at this time, a seal letter painted with a glaring scarlet color flew into the palace. It flew straight up to the palace. Shen Minggu, who originally had a calm expression, glanced at it, and his expression changed. He hurriedly reached out to grab it. He held the talisman in his hand. With a solemn expression, he tore it open. He took out the letter and opened it. His brows furrowed for a moment before relaxing. After reading it, his eyes lit up and he stood up abruptly. Heaven's will, heaven's will. It seems like I need to return to the sect as soon as possible. Shen Song was shocked. He stood up with a nervous expression and said, Senior Marshal Brother. What exactly happened? This scarlet talisman letter was not an ordinary letter. It was an extremely urgent matter that would only be sent out by Chongyuezhen Temple. With a shake of Shen Minggu's hand, the letter shattered into pieces. He laughed heartily and said, Elder Su failed to forcefully break through. His 1,000 years of cultivation was destroyed in a day, and now he's dead. However, one of the 3 treasures of our sect, the murderous Shadow Blade, needs to be hosted by another 3rd-generation disciple. Heaven is really helping me. Without Su Kuo, who else in the sect can compete with me? Hearing this, Shen Song's eyes also lit up. He became excited as he listened. After a while, he suddenly came to his senses and said in a small voice, Senior Marshal Brother means, let Su Kuo go, and don't bother with him. Shen Minggu waved his hand and said, no, wouldn't that give others an excuse? Not only do we have to go, we have to go quickly. He suddenly thought of something and asked, I heard that Zhang Yan and Tao Zhenhong's disciples are together. Shen Song nodded and said, yes. Shen Minggu pointed at him and said, okay, you go personally. Not only do you have to bring the 3,000 drops of Ren Kue water essence, but also release Shen Yan. In short, we have to wash our hands clean of this matter and not let the Su family get hold of us, and, he looked at Shen Song with a burning gaze and said, when you go, you might as well hint to that Zhang Yan to detain Su Kuo for a few more days. Don't rush to release him, but don't leave behind any evidence. Shen Song nodded and glanced at Shen Minggu, who was in high spirits, and said in a muffled voice, it's just that if Senior Marshal Brother doesn't go to the battle, this matter may affect your reputation. It will make others think that you are afraid of that Zhang Yan. Shen Minggu sneered and said, compared to the murderous Shadow Blade, this mere reputation is nothing. I'll find a chance to get it back in the future. Besides, the day Tao Zhenhong opens the sect is in the 1st month. When the time comes, if I have the help of the murderous Shadow Blade, why should I worry that I can't succeed? As for other matters, put them aside for now. Shen Song had always admired this senior marshal brother of his. At this moment, he said loudly, Senior Marshal Brother, don't worry. You can go back to the sect and leave this matter to me. Shen Minggu looked at him and said in a deep voice, remember, speak less and be more humble. At this moment, don't create unnecessary trouble. Shen Song nodded heavily, then cupped his hands and said, Senior Marshal Brother, I'll go arrange it now. Shen Minggu waved his hand and said, go. Shen Song left the main hall and went back to make some arrangements. He took Shen Yan out and put him in a human bag. Then he went to take out 3,000 drops of Ren Kue water essence. But after thinking for a while, he took out another 1,000 drops. After that, he left Hong, an island in a conveyance light and went to Oxhorn Island at a moderate pace. The 2 islands were only 1,000 miles apart. In less than an hour, he saw a large ship that was more than 4,000 feet long lying on the surface of the sea. There was a thin layer of flame covering the ship's body. In his heart, he was also surprised. This was the first time he had seen such a huge ship. No wonder this Zhang Yan was so bold as to wait here. Even if it was surrounded, even a nascent soul-enlightened master might not be able to break through the restrictions on this ship in a short time. When he arrived at the front of the ship, he remembered Shen Minggu's instructions and didn't dare to be too presumptuous. He said loudly, I'm Shin Song, a disciple of Chongyue True Temple. Under the order of my senior martial brother, Shin Minggu, I'm here to visit fellow Taoist Zhang. A clear voice came from the ship, so it's fellow Taoist Shin. Please enter the treasure pavilion. As soon as the voice finished, the flame on the ship disappeared and the seal faded. When Shin Song saw this, he calmed himself down and flew towards the source of the voice. After entering the treasure pavilion, a man with a rough and dark face came forward and said angrily, Honorable guest, please follow me this way. Shin Song frowned slightly and thought to himself, this Zhang Yan's ship is really imposing. Tens of thousands of spirit shells are probably a small number. I can see that this fellow Taoist Zhang is also extremely wealthy. Maybe he's a disciple of an aristocratic family in Qinsang school. But why is the servant beside him so coarse? He followed Zhang Pan all the way to the inner courtyard. After a few turns along the corridor, he came to a side hall. There was a bamboo curtain in front of him. Zhang Pan stopped. He bowed and said loudly, Master, I've brought that esteemed guest. After that, he lifted the bamboo curtain. He said, Esteemed guest can enter by yourself. Shin Song took a step inside and saw that the inner room was empty. There were no other objects or furnishings. There was only a jade couch on the opposite side. A handsome young Taoist was sitting cross-legged. He first praised good looks in his heart and then went forward to greet him, I'm Shin Kong, greetings to fellow Taoist. Zhang Yan's sharp gaze scanned him and then he said with a faint smile, Why didn't fellow Taoist Shin Minggu come by yourself? Shin Song smiled apologetically, Senior apprentice brother Shin has important matters to attend to and can't leave right now. Please don't blame him. However, according to what you said in the letter, I've brought all the items needed to redeem Senior apprentice brother Su. He reached into his sleeve and took out 3 palm-sized water pouches. He then sent them forward. Zhang Yan waved his hand and the 3 water pouches landed on the table. He picked one up and pulled out the cork to examine it. It was indeed the 9th Kue water essence without a doubt. He was surprised. He didn't think that this water would be so easily obtained and that he even had the intention to fight with Shin Minggu. He didn't really understand the other's actions. However, his expression didn't change. He capped the bottle and slowly put it down. He said with a smile, fellow Taoist Shin must have a close relationship with fellow Taoist Su in the sect to be able to bring this item here so quickly. Shin Tsung's spirit rose. He raised his head and looked at Zhang Yan, although the surnames Su and Shin are relatives, my senior apprentice brother Su and my senior apprentice brother Su don't have much contact. Zhang Yan's gaze flickered slightly. These words were equivalent to saying that Su Qiu and Shin Minggu didn't have a close relationship. They might even have a bad relationship. Shin Tsung coughed and took out a human pouch from his sleeve. He opened it and revealed an unconscious young man. He cupped his hands and said, last time, because of a misunderstanding, my senior apprentice brother captured a fellow Taoist under Tao Jinren. I heard that fellow Taoist Zhang and Tao Jinren are on good terms. So my senior apprentice brother ordered me to bring this person as well. I only ask that you take good care of my senior apprentice brother Su and don't let him suffer any harm. N? A subtle expression appeared on Zhang Yan's face. What kind of person was he? How could he not understand the meaning behind Shin Song's words? If the other really wanted to redeem Su Qiu, why would he say things like, take good care of him? He was clearly hinting to him to keep Su Qiu here and not to let him go in a hurry. Although he didn't know the real reason behind it, he could guess that it must have something to do with Shin Minggu not being able to come here. Perhaps something important had happened in the sect, and the other party didn't want Su Qiu to return to the sect at this time. He smiled to himself. This was also good. Su Qiu killed Dai Huan, and he had no intention of letting him go. He still had the intention of fighting with Shin Minggu. Now that he had gotten what he wanted, the rest had nothing to do with him. He could just hand this person and Xin Yan over to Guolai and the others. It could also be considered as returning a favor. However, Since the other party wasn't willing to take Su Kyo back, he couldn't let them go so easily. So he pretended not to know and put on a sincere expression. He sighed and said, "Senior apprentice brother Shen is indeed a man of his word. If that's the case, fellow Taoist can wait here for a moment. I'll order someone to bring fellow Taoist Su here, and you can take him back." This, Shen Song's expression changed slightly. Could it be that this Zhang Yan didn't understand the meaning of his words? He was anxious and raised his head, but what he saw was Zhang Yan's meaningful gaze. He was startled at first, then suddenly understood and cursed. He took 2 steps forward, took out a jade bottle from his sleeve, and placed it on the table. Then, he took 2 steps back. He didn't say what it was, but just stood there in silence. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed slightly. After a moment of silence, he smiled lightly and said, "Fellow Taoist Shen, I suddenly remembered that this fellow Taoist Su seemed to have killed a disciple of Tao Jinren. His fellow disciples are very sad and indignant. If I let fellow Taoist Su go, I'll definitely be stopped by them. I'm afraid I won't be able to return with you. However, I'm not a person who doesn't keep his promise. I'll keep these things for now. In the future, when fellow Taoist Shen Minggu is free, you can come to me to take them back." Shen Song couldn't help but curse again, but he let out a long sigh in his heart. He put on a regretful expression and sighed. Then the heavens really don't fulfill one's wish. No one expected this in advance. It seems that I can only report back to my senior apprentice brother and then make further plans. Chapter 192. Mysterious Spirit Island. Zhang Yan was cautious in his actions. When he was talking to Shen Song, he secretly ordered Zhang Pan to summon Wei Lihua. After she confirmed that the man in the sack was Shen Yan, she sent Shen Song, who was sweating profusely, out of the sea boat with a smile. After returning to his room, he carefully counted his gains and found that he had about 4,000 drops of Ren Kue water essence in his hands. He was satisfied and thought to himself, "I took advantage of Chongyuezhen Temple, but I didn't return them. Even if there's an inside story, the elders of Su Kyo's clan won't let this go. I can't go to Chongyuezhen Temple's flying boat Celestial Market. Why don't I go to Tao Jinren and release the 2 Taoists first before making other plans?" As he was thinking, he heard Zhang Pan shout from outside the door, "Master, Taoist Gua is here." Zhang Yan was planning to go find Guo Lai. Hearing this, he became spirited and stood up, saying, "Quickly invite him in." Guo Lai walked in with large strides, shouting as he walked, "Taoist Zhang, this is strange. What kind of trick are you playing? This Shen Minggu has never been willing to suffer losses. How did you get him to return them with a letter? If you say it's because of friendship, I, old Gua, definitely don't believe it." Zhang Yan smiled but didn't talk about this matter. He only said, "Taoist came at the right time. Now I have the intention to visit Tao Jinren and release the 2 Taoist seals on Lu and Jing. However, I don't know the way. Can Taoist help me?" Guo Lai had just heard that Zhang Yan asked for Shen Yan back. This meant that he had made the right decision in asking Zhang Yan to help him in the first place. This would allow him to gain face in front of the younger generation. He was happy and didn't mind Zhang Yan changing the topic. He said, "I came for this matter. My master lives on Mysterious Spirit Island. Without the guidance of a talisman, I'm afraid Taoist won't be able to find that place in your lifetime." Mysterious Spirit Island was made by Tao Jinhong using his qi to gather earth. This island floated on the sea. Other than clear feather sect disciples with talismans, outsiders couldn't enter. Guo Lai took out a talisman from his sleeve and flicked it towards Zhang Yan. He said, "Brother Zhang, refine this item." Zhang Yan raised his hand and caught it. Holding it in his palm, he didn't hesitate and immediately injected a strand of qi into it. In a flash, a spell appeared on it. He took a closer look and knew that this was the key technique that focused on how to capture the aura and deduce the location of Xianling Island. He saw that the incantation was exquisite and couldn't be compared to ordinary incantations. Obviously, it was a secret technique passed down in the sect. He smiled and said, "Dao friend, by giving me this incantation, aren't you afraid that I'll leak it out?" Guolai laughed aloud and said, "After the first month, our Pure Feather sect will establish our sect on the sea, a new sect apart from the 10 great sects of the Taoist sections. Do you think we'll be afraid that our sect will be coveted by others? If that's the case, why don't we disband earlier?" Zhang Yan nodded. Although Guolai's words were arrogant, the world was unpredictable. Over the past 10,000 years, other than the 3 great profound sects of Yucang, Shaoqing, and Yushao, the other great sects had been replaced from time to time. Who knew what the situation would be like after 1,000 years? The Donghua continent was about to face a calamity. Maybe Clear Feather's sect would be able to rise and dominate. After Guolai finished laughing, he looked at Zhang Yan and asked, "Old brother, let me ask you one more thing. After removing the 2 fellow Taoist seals, where are you planning to go?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I came out of the sect to find the medicine to condense the pill. Now that I have the 4 Marquises' water, I will return to the Donghua continent to find another medicine after I refine the pill transformation water for you." Guolai waved his hand and said, "Brother, I'm not in a hurry. My Clear Feather sect is about to open. Why don't you stay and watch the ceremony?" Zhang Yan looked at Guolai and nodded with a smile. "The opening of your sect is a joyous occasion. I will send you a congratulatory gift." Guolai laughed and said, "Brother Zhang, don't feel bad. Just listen to me. You will be rewarded when the time comes." He was still injured and couldn't talk for long. After a few more words, he returned to his room. After he left, Zhang Yan thought that Guolai seemed to have something else in the end. However, there was no point in thinking about it now. He would know when he arrived at Xianling Island. Thinking of this, he cast aside his thoughts, made a hand seal, and carefully deduced the location of Xianling Island according to the talisman. He yelled and activated the talisman. The Chi Dragon ship suddenly let out a roar, and the 36 dragon-climbing pillars rotated at the same time, stirring up huge waves and pushing the atmosphere away. The ship went straight to the southeast. The direction of Xianling Island where Tao Jinren was located was filled with storms and waves. If it was a normal boat, it would not be easy to reach this place. It would have to avoid the thunderclouds and storms according to the talisman's instructions to avoid getting caught up in it. However, the Dragon Country's boat was sturdy and did not need to worry about such things. Even if it plunged into a storm, it would not shake at all. Thus, the journey was smooth and stable. Zhang Yan pushed the speed of the Dragon Country's boat to the limit. In less than 10 days, he saw a black reef floating on the island. According to the talisman's instructions, this was where Xianling Island was. However, there was nothing else other than this black reef. He knew that there must be a barrier around this place. While he was inspecting it, Guolai had already flown out of the ship in a streak of light. When he was in midair, he stretched out a finger and a small hammer that shone with a dazzling golden light struck the reef twice and thrice, emitting a series of dong-dong sounds. As soon as he finished speaking, a white light soared into the sky. A short cultivator flew out from the reef and said loudly, "Which fellow disciple has returned?" Guolai shouted, "Brat, could it be that you don't recognize me? Hurry up and open the barrier." The short cultivator was shocked when he saw this. He quickly cupped his hands and said, "So it's Marshal Uncle Gua. Please wait for a moment." He did not dare to delay. He quickly took out a talisman and waved it at the opposite reef. The scenery in front of him rippled like water. Then, it suddenly separated and moved a corner of the illusion, revealing a door. Guolai pressed down the cloud and landed on the top of the treasure pavilion. He waved his hand and said, "Brother Zhang, just go inside." Zhang Yan nodded and drove the boat inside. After passing through the barrier, he felt his vision open and the world in front of him had changed. In the distance, there was a spirit mountain that was 100 zhang tall. There were ancient trees that reached the sky, clear springs and waterfalls. On the cliff, there were palace eaves, old vines and dragon branches climbing up the walls. There were 4 floating islands that surrounded the mountain, each occupying one side. There were arched golden bridges between them. From time to time, spirit apes would climb over and there were faint whistling sounds coming from the empty mountains and valleys. When Zhang Yan saw this scene, he was also amazed. He had seen many similar scenes in the sect, so it was not very rare. However, this Tao Xinren was only a 3rd layer Yuanian cultivator, yet he could condense such a blessed land with his mana. He did not know if he had someone's help or if he had relied on some powerful magic treasure. Wei Lihua and the others also came out of the treasure pavilion and stood on the deck with Zhang Yan. Before the boat reached the shore, a streak of light passed by. As if it saw them, it turned in the air and landed. A black-skinned Taoist appeared. He looked left and right and said, "Martial nephew Wei, you've returned? Why don't I see my nephew?" Wei Lihua did not expect this person to suddenly appear and could not help but take a step back. She looked at the 2 people from the same sect behind him and took a deep breath. She said in a low voice, "Martial uncle Dai, senior martial brother Dai." The middle-aged Taoist's expression changed. He took a step forward and said anxiously, "What happened to Dai Huan? Could it be that something happened to him?" Wei Lihua hesitated for a moment but still said, "Senior martial brother Dai has been harmed." "What?" The beard on the middle-aged Taoist's chest moved even though there was no wind. His sharp gaze swept towards Zhang Yan who was behind them and shouted, "Who dares to harm my nephew? Is it this person?" His voice rumbled and reverberated throughout the valley. Guolai frowned and glared at him, saying, "Dai Daoren, what are you saying? If it wasn't for me, brother Zhang, we might not have been able to catch the person who killed your nephew." Zhang Yan also knew that this person's heart was in a mess because of his nephew's death. He did not have the intention to target him, so he did not mind. However, looking at this person, he clearly had the cultivation of a minor Jin Dan. He thought to himself, looking at this person's surname and appearance, he is also not a disciple of Tao Xinren. I wonder where he came from. Wei Lihua did not dare to say more. She quickly opened the perfume pouch on her waist and took out the human sack. She untied the zipper and tipped it down. A person rolled out. Su Qiu was stuffed into the human sack and was originally unconscious. However, he had a strong foundation after all. When the sun shone on him, he woke up with a quiver. He saw a middle-aged Taoist looking at him with a murderous expression. Wei Lihua pointed at him and said, "This person is the murderer who killed senior martial brother Dai." Su Qiu saw the Taoist looking at him coldly and instantly felt that something was wrong. He hurriedly shouted, "Everyone, my father is Su Gongyuan. If you want to kill me, you better think carefully." Su Gongyuan. The middle-aged Taoist was shocked. He wanted to make a move but hesitated. He saw Guolai looking at him with a face full of mockery. He gritted his teeth and formed a spell with 2 fingers. With a clang, a magic sword flew out of its scabbard and slashed down. Su Qiu turned pale with fright. He wanted to dodge, but his body was restrained by the talisman. He could not move at all. He could only watch as the flying sword fell. However, when the flying sword reached the tip of his nose, it stopped and did not fall. He was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. The middle-aged Taoist's fingers trembled and a struggling expression appeared on his face. In the end, he stomped his feet and shouted. He put the flying sword back into its scabbard. With red eyes, he shouted at Wei Lihua and the others, "Why is it not you who died, but my nephew died?" When he finished, he did not greet them. He turned into a wisp of smoke and flew towards one of the jade peaks on the island. Guolai said with a face full of disdain, "You don't have the guts to take revenge, but you blame others for not dying. You've really learned something new." Zhang Yan also shook his head and said, "Could it be that this person is not from the same sect as you?" Guolai spat and said with disdain, "This person is just a rogue cultivator. If it wasn't for my 4th martial brother, I would have already kicked him out." He seemed to feel that he had said too much. He coughed and said to Zhang Yan, "Brother Zhang, I'll go see my master now. Leave your matter to me. Don't worry." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist." Guo Lai then said to Wei Lihua, "Marshal niece Wei, bring my brother Zhang to choose a good cave to stay in." Wei Lihua hurriedly said, "Marshal uncle, don't worry. Marshal niece will arrange everything." Guo Lai nodded and flew away. Wei Lihua turned around and smiled sweetly at Zhang Yan, saying, "Fellow Taoist, please come with me. Thank you for taking care of me on the boat. Now, let me show you my hospitality. #target =_ blank. Chapter 193. Divine Palace Talisman. Wei Lihua first asked her two junior martial brothers to carry the unconscious Fu Yuqing to her master. Then, she raised her wrist and took out a jade whistle. She placed it by her lips and blew it lightly. A clear cry of a crane came from the peak of the mountain. Two white cranes with black tails and crowns flew down. When they saw Wei Lihua, they were extremely happy. They spread their wings and legs, craned their necks and nodded their heads, and danced around her. Wei Lihua smiled and said, "These two fellows are here to make fun of me again." Zhang Yan took a few glances at them and smiled as well. "Are these the spirit birds that fellow Taoist is raising?" Wei Lihua nodded lightly and said, "Founding Master was originally a disciple of Nanhua sect. Our mystic spirit mountain's disciples are of the same lineage. We all like to raise spirit birds and strange beasts. Now that our Clear Feather sect is about to be established, even though we haven't set any rules, there are still many taboos. These spirit cranes have been living in the mountain for a long time, so they know where they can go and where they can't. That's why I called them over for fellow Taoists to ride on." After that, she chose one of the spirit cranes and rode on it. She waved her hand and said, "Fellow Taoist, please follow me." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Fellow Taoist, please wait for a moment." He made a hand seal and sent a voice note into the sea boat. Only then did he get on the crane's back. He felt that the feathers were soft as if he was sitting on a soft cushion. The spirit crane below him said with a clear female voice, "Fellow Taoist, please sit tight." Seeing that the crane could speak even before it transformed, Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, feel free to show me what you're capable of." The spirit crane let out a clear cry and took a few steps forward. It flapped its wings and soared into the sky. With a few flaps of its wings, it arrived above the clouds. Wei Lihua also rode on the crane and flew side by side with Zhang Yan. She patted the spirit crane beneath her and said, "Fellow Taoist, are you wondering why they can speak?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This must be a secret technique passed down in your sect, but I'm curious. Since your sect has such a technique, and the peng beside fellow Gua is quite spirited, why don't I see it speaking?" The crane beneath him suddenly said, "Dao brother, are you talking about Marshal Uncle Gua's rattling tongue?" Zhang Yan asked with interest, "Oh, do you know the reason?" The crane laughed and said, "I don't know if Dao brother asks about other things, but I do know about this matter. This old fellow has always had a loud voice and doesn't care about what he says. He often scolds the disciples until they are black and blue all over. Unfortunately, he is Marshal Uncle Gua's mount and no one can do anything to him." Eventually, Marshal Uncle Gua felt that he was too noisy and simply sealed his mouth so that he can't speak nonsense. Our ears were also much quieter. At this point, it seemed to be taking pleasure in the rock's misfortune. It must have suffered quite a bit from the rock. Wei Lihua pretended to be unhappy and said, "Shao Yi, you seem to talk a lot too." The spirit crane was shocked and said with grievance, "My dear wife, don't blame me. Shao Yi is a taciturn gourd. There's usually no one to talk to here and it's really boring. That's why I can't help but say a few more words." Wei Lihua smiled lightly and said, "The founding master is about to open the sect. In the future, when the sect grows stronger, it won't be restricted to this close land anymore. There will be a day when you can spread your wings and soar high. The relationship between the spirit bird and its owner was one where the bird thrived and the owner suffered. If the owner's cultivation level was profound and he strived to improve, his status would naturally rise. If the owner was a ride master who didn't seek to improve, then he could only blame himself for being unlucky. As Zhang Yan and Wei Lihua chatted happily, the spirit crane carried the two of them to a valley filled with lush greenery, birdsong, and the fragrance of flowers. At this moment, a ray of light flew out from an octagonal pavilion on the opposite cliff. A round-faced woman in a green dress stepped on a beautiful flying handkerchief and approached them. She said in surprise, "Senior Marshal Sister Wei, you've returned." She then looked at Zhang Yan with her bright eyes and said, "Which island is this Senior Marshal brother from? I've never seen you before." This woman looked to be around 27 or 28 years old. Her cheeks were bright red, her almond-shaped eyes were alluring, and her figure was enchanting like a ripe peach. Zhang Yan took a look and knew that she was a demon cultivator. Wei Lihua hurriedly said, "Junior Marshal Sister Fu, this is fellow Taoist Zhang. He's a good friend of Marshal Uncle Gua. He's also here to watch the ceremony." Junior Marshal Sister Fu smiled charmingly at Zhang Yan and bowed. "So it's fellow Taoist Zhang's good friend. I'm Fu Hongyu. Greetings, fellow Taoist Zhang." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and bowed his head in greeting. Wei Lihua pointed at the woman and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, don't look down on Junior Marshal Sister Fu. She's the head housekeeper of our mystic spirit mountain." Junior Marshal Sister Fu laughed and her eyes were like crescent moons. She said, "What head housekeeper? I'm just running an errand on behalf of the elders and fellow disciples." "Fellow Taoist Zhang, don't listen to Senior Marshal Sister Wei's nonsense." She went up and held Wei Lihua's arm affectionately. "Since Senior Marshal Sister has returned, why don't you stay here for a few days?" Wei Lihua patted her arm and sighed. "I'd like that too. It's just that I've only just returned and fellow Taoist Zhang's accommodation was personally arranged by Marshal Uncle Gua. I haven't had the time to go back and see my master." "Oh. That's a pity." Junior Marshal Sister Fu raised her eyebrows. She glanced at Zhang Yan and said, "Senior Marshal Sister Wei, Senior Marshal Brother Zhang, if that's the case, come with me." She led the way and flew towards a mountain. But they hadn't taken a few steps when they saw waves of thunder rumbling and demon clouds roiling on another mountain, causing Zhang Yan to be unable to help but take a few more glances. Wei Lihua was surprised as well. "What's going on there?" Junior Marshal Sister Fu curled her lips and said, "Senior Marshal Sister Wei, you don't know. Next month, when the ancestral master opens the sect, 4th Marshal Uncle invited many demon kings and rogue cultivators to attend the ceremony. These people are used to messing around and fight every other day. They must be fighting again. We don't have to pay attention to them." She swung her waist and drove the flying handkerchief forward. In less than the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, she pushed down the cloud and landed in front of a cave abode. She turned around and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, what do you think of this place?" Zhang Yan got off the spirit crane and stood still. He looked around and saw that this place was surrounded by green pines and cypresses. There was a pavilion that leaped out of the warm cliff, looking quite elegant. Below it was a gurgling stream, and further ahead was a magnificent waterfall. He nodded and said, "This place has a unique scenery. Junior Marshal Sister Fu has chosen a good place." Junior Marshal Sister Fu said with a smile, "As long as Senior Marshal Brother is satisfied." However, Wei Lihua was still worried. She entered the Immortal's cave and looked around. Although the decorations were clean and tidy, there was nothing else on the table other than a bronze cup and a long pearl on it. She couldn't help but frown. "Junior Marshal Sister, why is this place so simple and crude?" Junior Marshal Sister Fu complained, "Senior Marshal Sister, don't blame me for not being diligent. It's also Senior Marshal Brother Zhang who came late. These good cave abodes have all been picked by those rogue cultivators and monster kings. Go outside and take a look, Where else can compare to this cave abode? Zhang Yan also walked in. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Wei, I think this place is very good. It's very quiet, so there's no need to be picky." Junior Marshal Sister Fu's face lit up, and she said in a sweet voice, "Senior Marshal Brother Zhang is really considerate. You know my difficulties." Seeing that Zhang Yan didn't have any objections, Wei Lihua didn't want to be nosy. She was also in a hurry to leave, so she said, "I still have to go see my master. I'll come and visit fellow Taoist another day." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "Do as you please, fellow Taoist." Wei Lihua bowed to him, then leaped up and turned into a streak of light, disappearing into the sky. Junior Marshal Sister Fu saw that Wei Lihua had left, and she turned around and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, you can walk around freely when you're free, but you need to remember that the cave abodes of those monster kings are just beyond this mountain. You must not go there. Those monster kings are still proud of their status and won't bully others, but their juniors are just wild people who eat rotten meat and eat fish. They'll fight with others if they don't agree with you. If they get into a dispute with you and hurt the harmony between them, I'll be stuck in the middle. It'll be very difficult for me." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "If no one comes to provoke me, I won't meddle." Junior Marshal Sister Fu giggled and said, "I know Senior Marshal Brother is a reasonable person. Senior Marshal Brother is Senior Marshal Sister Wei's honored guest, so you can be considered one of us. If there's anything else you want to tell me, I'll do my best to satisfy Senior Marshal Brother." Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "There's no need for Junior Marshal Sister Fu to worry about the rest of the matters." Junior Marshal Sister Fu saw that Zhang Yan had the intention to chase her away, so she took out a talisman and said coquettishly, "If Senior Marshal Brother has any orders, take this talisman and summon the old ape in the mountain. He'll be able to find me then." Once she finished speaking, she handed the talisman over to Zhang Yan. After Zhang Yan took it, she didn't say anything else and took her leave. She threw the flying handkerchief into the air, twisted her waist, and got up. Then, she turned into a rainbow and returned to her immortal's cave. Not long after, she landed in front of a temple with lush flowers and plants. She lifted the hem of her skirt and was about to step inside when she saw a figure flashing out from inside. She was so frightened that she covered her chest and took 2 steps back. She said, "Which dead ghost dares to scare this lady?" A light chuckle came from the opposite side, and a tall and slender young cultivator with red lips and white teeth appeared. He smiled and said, "It's me. Did I disturb Junior Marshal Sister?" Junior Marshal Sister Fu let out a sigh of relief and rolled her eyes at him. She said, "So it's Senior Marshal Brother Feng. What's wrong? Are you here to ask for information again?" The young cultivator smiled and said, "In front of Junior Marshal Sister Fu, I naturally can't hide anything. I just passed by here and saw Senior Marshal Sister Wei leading a fellow Taoist past in a hurry. May I know what that fellow Taoist is doing here? I'll pay him a visit another day." Junior Marshal Sister Fu said disdainfully, "Do you think I don't know what you're up to? I'm afraid you're worried that another person will come to compete with you for the Immortal Palace talisman, right?" The young Taoist chuckled and raised his hand to pass her a small bag. Fu Hongyu looked left and right and nimbly took the bag. She put it into her fragrance pouch and patted it twice before saying in a low voice, "I've also not found out about this person's background. I heard that he's a good friend of Senior Marshal Uncle Gua." The young Taoist made a sound of surprise and said, "Does Senior Marshal Uncle Gua also want to join in?" Fu Hongyu raised her eyebrows and said, "What do you mean?" "Why, only you are allowed to compete for the Immortal Palace talisman, but others are not allowed to." The young Taoist smiled and said, "There are a total of 48 talismans. Whether or not one can get it depends on fate. It doesn't matter if there's one more or one less person." Fu Hongyu made a sound of, "Oh," and glared at him. She said, "Senior Marshal Brother, you're quite open-minded, but do you really think so?" Without waiting for the man to speak, she flicked her sleeves and said, "Forget it, I don't have the patience to find out about your shady business. Pretend I didn't say anything. But you must remember that this person was brought here by Senior Marshal Sister Wei, so you have to give me some face. At least during the few days I'm on duty, you guys are not allowed to provoke him." The young Daoist's eyes darted around and he readily agreed, "Since Junior Marshal Sister Fu has spoken, I'll naturally listen to you." But he chuckled and said, "Even if my senior marshal brothers don't go, I'm afraid there'll be people who can't help but weigh his weight. Target equals _blank. Chapter 194. Opening the sack. The demon concubine's provocation. Inside the cave, Zhang Yan sat on a praying mat and breathed out spiritual breath from his mouth and nose. He trapped a shiny sleeve in the clear air and made it roll back and forth with the breath. However, every few moments, the sleeve would struggle and twist, as if the true consciousness inside was unwilling to bow down and admit defeat. For the past few days, Zhang Yan had repeatedly refined this item and had already gotten rid of all the impurities inside. However, deep inside the sleeve, there was still a mass of spiritual essence. This was the accumulation of Xiao Han's blood and sweat. It seemed that he had used some secret technique. Even though this person had died long ago, he was still using the sleeve to defend himself. It was very stubborn and firm. Zhang Yan had tried many gentle techniques before, but none of them could completely get rid of it. However, if he were to use a violent method, he was afraid that he would destroy the item inside the sleeve as well. That would not be worth it. Therefore, he decided to use the water refining technique to slowly get rid of it. After continuously refining for several days and nights, there was finally only a trace of essence left in the sleeve, and it had already reached the most crucial step. The sleeve began to tremble under the pressure of his spiritual essence. Then, it began to violently struggle as if it was making a final struggle. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He knew that the time had come. He shouted and continuously breathed out a few mouthfuls of spiritual essence. These few mouthfuls of spiritual essence were like the last straw that broke the camel's back. After a few sizzling sounds, the sleeve wailed and a wisp of green smoke came out. With a pata sound, it fell to the ground. Zhang Yan laughed loudly and waved his sleeve to get rid of the filthy spiritual essence. With a wave of his hand, he took the sleeve into his hand. There was a slight smile on his lips. After spending a lot of time and effort, he had finally completely refined this item today. He hoped that the item hidden inside would not disappoint him. He adjusted his breathing for a moment and unhurriedly stretched out his hand. He shook open the lock and slowly undid the sleeve. His mind went in to investigate and he couldn't help but feel refreshed. This item was worthy of being a Xian artifact. It was very different from the sleeve he used before. This pouch was divided into 3 gates: heaven, earth, and man. The items were placed according to different categories, and were not mixed together like the sleeve pouch he used. He first took out the things from the human gate and placed them on the table. After counting carefully, he found that there were more than 3,000 high-quality spiritual shells, more than 100 smooth and warm sea spirit pearls, and a lot of jade talisman. Other than that, the rest were some miscellaneous items, such as gold and silver utensils, robes, and headbands. There were many types of these items, and they were not rare items. Therefore, Zhang Yan glanced over them in a hurry, and with a roll of his sleeve, he put them away. After leaving this place, he went to open the earth gate and poured out all the items hidden within. His eyes couldn't help but light up. There were elixirs, spirit waters, animal bones, medicinal herbs, and rare zoysia grasses. They filled the table, big and small. He looked around and reached out to take a bottle. After opening it, he put it in front of his nose and smelled it. He raised his eyebrows and smiled. It's actually the Life Marrow Great Virtue Ointment. It's good stuff, but it's rare. The Life Marrow Great Virtue Ointment was a top-grade medicine. It could not only be used to connect broken limbs and regenerate flesh and bones. Even if one's limbs were crippled, as long as one took enough of the ointment within 2 hours, one's vitality could be stimulated, and broken limbs could be regrown. He identified all the medicines one by one and found that they were all rare elixirs. The Shao clan was indeed a big business. Just a junior disciple already had so many good things. In the end, he picked up an inconspicuous porcelain bottle and smelled it. He was startled, and then he laughed. With just this item, the few days' effort was not wasted. There was only one elixir in the bottle, and it was called 5 Heart Yang Restoration Pill. This pill was one of the 36 precious pills in the world. As long as one took one pill in advance under the tongue, even if the physical body was greatly damaged, it could still ensure that one would not die for a while. Even if one was beheaded, as long as the body could be reattached in time, one's life could still be extended. This pill was extremely precious, and the recipe had long been lost. As far as he knew, Zhou Chengju only had 4 of them. If he sold this pill, it would not be too much to get a profound-level weapon. Zhang Yan thought to himself, just the Earth Gate alone has such precious items. I wonder what's hidden in the Heaven Gate. He felt a little more anticipation in his heart. He put away the bottles and jars on the table and opened the Heavenly Gate's security lock. As soon as he loosened the restraints of the restriction, several treasures and auspicious lights appeared, and he could not help but squint his eyes under the light. He urged his mind and released one of the items. A black python flew out, and with a twist in the air, it turned into a 6-feet-long flag. He reached out and took it. He shook it, and there seemed to be the sound of waves in his ears. He sent a breath of spiritual qi into it and refined it slightly. After a careful examination, he knew the origin of this item. This flag was a spiritual weapon refined by the elders of the Qinsang school. It was specially given to meritorious disciples. It was called Tri-Elements Mixed Water Flag. When used, one only needed to shake it, and the waves could be divided and gathered. With this item in hand, going into the deep sea alone would be like walking on flat ground. This magic weapon could not be used to fight enemies. Zhang Yan only played with it for a while before putting it away. He took out another item and casually flipped it over. It was actually another magic weapon given by the Qinsang school. This item was called Zhuyuaning Xing 3 Qi Palace Guard Flag. It was a set of formation flags used by cultivators to protect themselves when they went out to travel. This flag had a total of 16 sides. As long as the formation was arranged, it could gather the vigorous and thick qi of heaven and earth to resist external enemies. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. This item was quite practical. In the future, it would come in handy when he traveled in the wilderness. Just as he was about to continue to investigate, he felt that the overflowing spiritual qi in the cave residence was gradually weakening. Looking up, he found that the more than 100 spirit shells that were originally surrounding him had already dimmed, and their bright surface was also gray and dull. He waved his sleeves expressionlessly and swept these spirit shells aside. He took out hundreds of spirit shells from his sleeves and rearranged them beside him. After all, the Xianling mountain under his feet was made by Taozhenren. Therefore, there was no spiritual vein. It only relied on the operation of the formation to extract spiritual vigor. However, most of the spiritual vigor was divided by Taozhenren's disciples and the demon kings who came to the island to watch the ceremony. There was very little spiritual vigor here. This was also one of the reasons why Wei Lihua was previously dissatisfied with this cave residence arranged by Fu Hongyu. However, when a cultivator traveled outside, if there was no suitable cave residence for cultivation, he could take out the spirit shell to absorb the spiritual qi in it. He could still cultivate properly. Usually, the spiritual qi in a spirit shell was enough for a Ming qi cultivator to use for 3 to 5 days. For Zhang Yan's level, 7 or 8 spirit shells were only enough for him to use for a day. However, he was rich, so he did not feel the pinch when using it. At this moment, he heard a squeaking sound outside the cave. He could not help but smile. He kept his sleeves and said, "Fellow Taoist, please come in." A white shadow flashed in front of the cave abode. A white-haired old ape was holding a jade plate with many fresh fruits and a bottle of fine wine on it. It walked in obediently like a human and placed the jade plate on the table. It cupped its hands and said, "Please enjoy, fellow Taoist. I'll take my leave now." Zhang Yan nodded slightly, and the old ape slowly retreated. Zhang Yan looked down and shook his head with a smile. At his level of cultivation, he had already abstained from eating to prolong his life. He wanted to refuse, but the old ape said that this was an order from Fu Hongyu. If it did not treat the esteemed guest well, it would be punished, so he could not refuse. At this moment, a rumbling sound came from afar. The jade plate on the table jumped along with it, but he did not seem to hear it. These days, conveyance lights danced in the sky on the opposite mountain every day, and there were endless battles. However, he was focused on cultivating and did not pay attention to it. He took out his sleeves again. There were only 3 treasures in the heavenly gate. He had already taken out the banners and formation flags, so there was only one item that he had not looked at yet. He probed inside with his consciousness and discovered a white light lying quietly inside. He couldn't see what it was, so he activated his spiritual chi and released the white light. Unexpectedly, the white light suddenly let out a whistling sound and flew up, slashing at his body. Zhang Yan had already seen clearly that it was only a spirit tool. It was just that it seemed to be possessed by the soul essence of some monster, so it did not listen to him. He sneered and sat still. There was a clang, and the light only cut a white mark on his neck. Seeing that it could not do anything to Zhang Yan, the thing was also frightened, so it turned around and scuttled out of the cave residence. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and shouted, "How can I let you leave?" He opened his sleeve and put away his sleeve pouch. Then, he leaped up and followed after Chu Li. At this moment, outside the cave residence, there was a chariot that came on a cloud and landed on the top of the mountain. There were a dozen people standing on the chariot, a man and a woman. The man was handsome, but there was a hint of evil in his eyes. It was Senior Marshal Brother Feng, who asked about Zhang Yan from Fu Hongyu. The woman was a young married woman. Her hair was tied up high, and her skin was whiter than snow. She had a willowy waist, and her movements revealed a flirtatious charm. The woman looked around with her beautiful eyes and said with a sweet voice, "Fellow Feng, was this the place you were talking about?" Senior Marshal Brother Feng smiled and said, "Lady Jade, what do you think of this place?" Lady Jade said lazily, "It can be considered passable. That mountain is fighting and killing all day long, and it is really too noisy. This place is quiet, and it is barely livable." Senior Marshal Brother Feng looked ahead and pretended to be surprised. He said, When I came here 2 days ago, I didn't see anyone living here. How did it become occupied in a flash of 2 days?" Lady Jade glanced at Senior Marshal Brother Feng and said lightly, "Just chase them away. There isn't even a cave residence with spirit chi. What kind of amazing person can live here?" Senior Marshal Brother Feng had a plan in his heart, but he deliberately said, "I'm afraid it's not appropriate, right?" Lady Jade snorted and said impatiently, "What are you afraid of? Even if the sky falls, I will bear it." She pointed with her finger and pointed to a tall and sturdy demon cultivator behind her. She said, "Tong Bing, quickly chase this person away." The demon cultivator said in a muffled voice, "Yes, Lady Jade." He got off the carriage and walked towards the cave residence. Relying on the great background of the person behind him, he didn't report at the door and swaggered in. However, he had only taken a few steps when he saw a white light rush out. He couldn't help but exclaim in surprise, "Treasure!" After letting out a cry, he recklessly reached out to grab it. When the streak of light saw that someone was blocking it, it let out a cry and stretched out its body. With a chi sound, it instantly cut the person in half. The demon cultivator screamed and died on the spot. Outside the cave residence, Lady Jade's pretty face changed when she heard this. Then, she saw the white light fly out and her beautiful eyes lit up. She said happily, "Good treasure, I want it." However, as soon as his voice trailed off, a streak of light flew out and engulfed the streak of light. Lady Jade was startled, and her cheeks instantly turned bright red. Her face was full of anger as she shouted, Taoist, what kind of magic treasure is that? How can you take it for yourself? Hurry up and hand it over to this empress. Target equals _blank. Chapter 195. People die for wealth, birds die for food. Zhang Yan's 2 fingers clamped down on the white light, but the thing was still struggling. Sometimes, it would emit a 3-foot-long light, and sometimes, it would shrink into a 2-finger-wide light dot. However, no matter how hard it tried, it couldn't escape. This magic treasure had such spirituality. Lady Jade and senior brother Feng were envious. But seeing that Zhang Yan didn't care about them, Lady Jade was furious. She put on a stern face and shouted, "Taoist, did you hear my question?" Zhang Yan sat on the cloud and looked at Lady Jade. He said indifferently, "Are you confused? This place was formed by Tao Xinren using his power to gather the earth into a mountain. It has only been 20 years. How can there be a treasure appearing?" Lady Jade's face turned red. If this treasure appeared, it could have been hidden underground or under the sea for hundreds or thousands of years. If there really was a treasure here, it would have escaped long ago or Tao Xinren took it. There was no third possibility. She saw that the magic treasure was extraordinary and her heart was burning with greed. She was impulsive and spoke without thinking. But she was usually flattered in the palace and developed a rude temperament. How could she allow others to question her? She immediately argued, "What a joke. You think it's yours just because you say it's yours. Then why couldn't you control it and let it escape? Perhaps some expert once resided in this immortal's cave and deliberately left this magic treasure behind to await fate. Now that I've arrived here, this item is in such a hurry to come out. It's clearly fated with me, yet it was snatched away by you, little thief. Hurry up and hand it over." Zhang Yan sneered and said, "This treasure is arrogant and unruly. I was careless and allowed it to escape. Fellow Taoist, you only took a look at it and you said it was yours. How unreasonable." Consort Jade was about to retort when senior brother Feng shook his head and thought to himself, although Consort Jade's charm arts are impressive and managed to bewitch Demon King Xian Tong, her brain isn't that good. Why is she bickering with this person? Now is the time for you to bully others. Why is there a need to reason? He coughed and said in a low voice, "Lady Jade, why are you arguing with him? This person killed Tong Bing. No matter what, he is still your servant. How can we let this go? We need to demand justice from him." With this reminder, Lady Jade immediately came to her senses and scolded, "Taoist, you killed my servant. What crime do you think you deserve?" Zhang Yan sneered, "Your servant barged into someone else's cave abode and deserved to be killed. I haven't asked you for not disciplining him." Lady Jade had always been favored by Demon King Xian Tong. No one had ever dared to go against her wishes. Now that she was rebutted by Zhang Yan, her chest tightened and her lips trembled. Senior Marshal Brother Feng chuckled and stood up. "Fellow Taoist, you have to think carefully. Do you know who this Lady Jade is? She is Demon King Xian Tong's Taoist companion. I advise you to lower your head and hand over the treasure. If not, once the Demon King is furious, it will be too late for regrets." Zhang Yan didn't care about them. He said a few more words to them because he was afraid that the Dharma treasure would take the opportunity to escape again. Yet now, this magic treasure had already been suppressed by him to the point of being unable to move, so he shouted right away before enveloping it with dark light and tossing it back into his sleeve. At this moment, he didn't have any more worries and said indifferently, "I don't care who you are or what background you have. If you want to seize my magic treasure, then feel free to ask the sword ball in my hand." Lady Jade suddenly shrieked, "Are you all dead? Take down this Taoist, pull out his tendons, pull out his bones, cut out his heart, and dig out his liver to go with the wine of the old master." As soon as she said this, 2 Taoists with mouse whiskers stood out. One of them had a sword on his left and the other had a sword on his right, but they looked exactly the same. They were a pair of twin brothers and were rogue cultivators in the East Sea. They were taught by a strange person when they were young and later became Demon King Xian Tong's followers. Seeing that the two of them were good at using flying swords together and were mystic light cultivators, they were specially sent to protect Lady Jade. The two of them stood side by side and stared at Zhang Yan. They cut their fingers and formed a spell while chanting. Two sword hums were heard and the two flying swords were unsheathed. They turned into two rays of light in the air and slashed towards Zhang Yan like lightning. Zhang Yan saw that the two swords were mixed and impure. Even when the swords were unsheathed, blood was needed to be sacrificed. It was extremely evil. It was obvious that the swords were not taught properly. With one look, he could tell that it was an unorthodox technique. He sneered and shook his shoulder. A ball of mysterious light that was more than 600 feet wide burst out from the top of his head. There were 3 colors of light coming out from it. The blue mist was like a dense fog, the golden light was like the sunset, and the blazing fire was like the red clouds. The 3 lights were entangled together, but they did not interfere with each other. Upon seeing the 2 flying swords flying toward it, the ball of profound light swelled up and engulfed them. With a few crackling sounds, sparks flew in the mysterious light, and the raging fire clamored. In just a moment, these 2 high-quality flying swords were stirred into a pile of scrap iron. They spun a few more times in the light, and in the end, not even a scrap was left. In the past, when these 2 Taoists used their flying swords to attack their enemies, even if the other party used mysterious light to block, they would be torn apart with one sword. There was no exception, so they were very confident. They didn't expect the Tai mysterious light to be so powerful. A moment of carelessness caused their natal flying swords to be destroyed. Their minds were severely injured and they cried out in pain. They fell to the ground on their backs and blood flowed out of their 7 orifices. Their limbs twitched and it looked like they were going to die. Lady Jade's horizons had been broadened, but when had she ever seen a mystic light destroy a Dharma treasure? Her almond-shaped eyes were wide open and her mouth was slightly agape. Her face was filled with disbelief. When the people behind her saw what happened to the 2 Taoists, they were also shocked. The mysterious light released by Zhang Yan was extremely domineering and shocked the group of people on the spot. Senior Marshal Brother Feng was also shocked and thought to himself, what Tao technique is this? How is it so powerful? To be able to destroy a magical treasure with mysterious light, this is not something an ordinary itinerant cultivator can do. This person is either from a large Xianmen sect or has a great celestial fate. He wanted to find a few people to test Zhang Yan's strength and see if he was invited by Guolai to compete with them for the Immortal Palace decree. Therefore, he encouraged Lady Jade, who had a strong background but was not very smart, to come here. If Zhang Yan was useless, he could rest assured. If he was capable and angered Lady Jade, he could get Demon King Xian Tong to come out and get rid of him. He thought to himself, looks like my previous worries were not wrong. This person's background is probably not simple, and he is a variable. I need to report this matter to my master in time, in case there are any mistakes when the Celestial Palace is opened. Since he had found out that Zhang Yan was not someone to be trifled with, he might as well retreat for the time being. Therefore, he said, Lady Jade, this person's cultivation is not shallow. He is not here to fight. We do not have powerful magical treasures and may not be able to defeat him. Why don't we retreat for the time being and ask Demon King Tong to come and help you? Seeing Zhang Yan's power, Lady Jade could not help but panic and wanted to retreat. However, she had always been arrogant and had never suffered such grievances. Therefore, she said to Zhang Yan fiercely, You Taoist, just you wait. When I return, I will definitely teach you a lesson. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and he shouted, Leave. Not so easy. He once told Fu Hongyu that if others did not provoke him, he would not meddle. However, if others bullied him, they could not blame him for not showing mercy. Moreover, if he let this woman go, she would definitely ask Demon King Xian Tong to come and make things difficult for him. Since he had to fight anyway, he might as well deal with these people here and take the initiative. Thinking of this, his heart was filled with murderous intent. The sword pill hidden in his primal aperture was activated by his murderous intent. It let out a long and clear cry and leaped out from between his eyebrows. Immediately, it turned into a rainbow and soared up. For a moment, the sword intent surged and the bright light was like a wash. A biting cold air spread in all directions. Senior brother Feng saw that when Zhang Yan attacked with his sword, he knew it was an orthodox Xianmen. Moreover, at this moment, the murderous intent was so strong that he knew it was not good. He hesitated for a moment and quietly took a few steps back. Then, he suddenly rode the conveyance light and flew towards the clouds. Zhang Yan's mind was activated and the stellar sword pill immediately turned into a pure sword light. In an instant, it traversed tens of feet in the void and slashed towards Lady Jade. Lady Jade was stunned. She had always been domineering and knew that no matter where she went, no one dared to not give face to Demon King Xian Tong. She did not think that someone would dare to attack her and did not think of dodging. However, right at this moment, a dark green jade bracelet on her hand suddenly flew off her wrist and blocked the path of the sword light. A clear sound rang out as the jade bracelet was instantly broken into two. However, with this delay, she woke up with a start and couldn't help but let out a sharp cry. In a panic, she picked up the talisman and shook it, causing the flying carriage beneath her to instantly soar into the sky. It was obvious that she was about to flee. However, before she could reach the top of the cloud, Zhang Yan had already released all 365 drops of serene heavy water. With a point of his finger, the heavy water instantly gathered into a mighty wave and swept upwards. In an instant, it caught up and wrapped around Lady Jade and the rest. After a few more spins, only screams and screams could be heard from within. Including Lady Jade, all of them had broken bones and flesh. They fell from the sky and for a moment, no one knew if they were dead or alive. Senior brother Feng did not see the tragic state of Lady Jade and the rest. In his mind, he thought that if he left first, Zhang Yan would be attracted by Lady Jade and the rest and would not have time to care about him. He was initially confident, but when he inadvertently looked back, he was scared out of his wits. He saw that in the vast clouds, there was an exquisite sword light tearing through the air. Only now did he know why it was said that fighting with sword cultivators was the most dangerous. The speed of this sword escape was really unimaginable. In just a few breaths, it had shortened the distance by a large margin. Zhang Yan looked ahead with a cold gaze. Since he had already made a move, he had to do it to the extreme. He could not let anyone escape. Senior brother Feng saw that Zhang Yan was getting closer and he secretly cried out in his heart. He said, "This person did not chase after Lady Jade first and came to kill me. What kind of logic is this? Could it be that he knows that I was the one who secretly urged him to do this?" However, he did not expect that Lady Jade and the rest could not even last one round in front of Zhang Yan. However, there was no time for him to let his imagination run wild. He could only grit his teeth and endure. He just had to go over this mountain in front of him and it would be where the disciples of Clear Plume sect cultivated. He really did not believe that Zhang Yan would have the guts to chase after him. Target =_blank. Chapter 196. Demon King Xian Tong Senior Martial Brother Feng tried his best to escape, but the more he ran, the more uneasy he felt. The ray of light behind him was too fast. In the blink of an eye, it had closed the distance between them. It would not be long before it caught up with him. The mountain ahead seemed to be a short distance away, yet it felt far beyond reach. At this critical moment, he didn't have the time to hesitate, so he gritted his teeth and withdrew a white feather from his sleeve before fiercely blowing a mouthful of spirit energy onto it. After being nourished by the spiritual energy, the white feather seemed to have gained sentience. It trembled fiercely and struggled free from his hand. In a split second, it turned into a mass of smoke and enveloped him. Then, it turned into a streak of white light and flew away. With this help, his speed was more than twice as fast as before. In just a few breaths, he would cross the mountain. Zhang Yan saw Senior Marshal Brother Feng desperately fleeing in one direction, and he could guess that there must be something behind that mountain. He sneered, and the profound qi around his body surged. The escape light under his body suddenly burst out with a deafening sound, breaking through the atmosphere. In the sky, a flickering stream of light that was as fast as lightning chased after him. Just as he was about to catch up to the other party, a wisp of white smoke rose from the jade peak below, separating the two of them. Zhang Yan felt a gentle push on his body, and a gentle voice said in his ear, "Fellow Taoist, please have mercy." The mana in this smoke was strong, but it was not hot, and there was not a trace of hostility. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed, and he calmly turned around. When he stopped, he saw a beautiful Taoist nun in black with white hair standing on top of the white smoke. She wore a high crown and had a horsetail whisk in her hand. She looked at him with a slight smile and said, "Forgive me for being rude, but are you fellow Taoist Zhang?" Zhang Yan was surprised. He stood on the cloud and returned the greeting, "Yes, I am." "May I know your name?" The nun placed the horsetail whisk on her arm and bowed, "I am Wang Yingfang. You must have heard of me from my eldest senior brother." Hearing this name, Zhang Yan immediately knew who she was. This nun was Tao Xinren's third disciple. She was originally a demon cultivator from the East Sea, but Tao Xinren saw that she was strong, so he took her in as a disciple. It was said that Taoist Master Tao had only wanted her to be an in-name disciple. The reason she had been able to successfully enter the sect was all because of Guolai's help. Thus, in the Clear Feather sect, this Taoist nun was the closest to Guolai, so it was not strange that she knew his name. Zhang Yan saw that this Taoist nun's eyebrows were green, her skin was like ice and her bones were like jade, her entire body was filled with qi of Tao, but unexpectedly he could not detect any demonic aura. He knew that this person must have received the orthodox teachings of the Xianmen sect and was not an ordinary demonic cultivator. He smiled and said, "So it's Taoist Wang. Fellow Taoist Gua has often mentioned you. Seeing you today, you really have the beauty of an immortal." Wang Yingfang hurriedly said, "You flatter me. Fellow Taoist, you flatter me." Senior brother Feng had gotten Wang Yingfang's help and calmed down. He thought that he had escaped with his life, but now that he heard that the two of them were friends, he became nervous again. Wang Yingfang glanced at him, shook her head, and said with slight disappointment, "This martial nephew of mine, Feng Yao, usually loves to stir up trouble everywhere, and I'm well aware of his temper. May I know how he has offended fellow this time?" Zhang Yan smiled and told her the whole story. Wang Yingfang frowned slightly. In all fairness, there was nothing wrong with Zhang Yan's action. Not to mention on Xianling Island, even if it was anywhere else, if you dared to steal someone else's treasure, you deserved it and could not blame others. Feng Yao saw that she was unhappy and cursed in his heart. He hurriedly shouted, "Martial Uncle Wang, please listen to me. Lady Jade was just not familiar with the island's paths, so she invited me to go with her. She also wanted to steal this fellow's treasure on the spur of the moment. How would I know that she would do this? This matter is just a disaster for the fish in the moat. How unjust." Wang Yingfang did not pay attention to him. She pondered for a while and said to Zhang Yan, "To be honest, I am familiar with this martial nephew Feng's master. That life-saving feather was given to him by me. Now that he is in front of me, I can't leave him in the lurch. I hope fellow Taoist can give I some face and let him go." Zhang Yan smiled gently and said, "Since Taoist Wang has spoken, I should agree. However, if I let him go, I'm afraid that he will bring people to trouble me. Although I am not afraid, I don't want to waste too much effort. I might as well kill him now." Feng Yao heard the murderous intent in his words and could not help but tremble with fear. He was afraid that Wang Yingfang would agree. Wang Yingfang hurriedly bowed and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, don't worry. You are also an important guest of my mystic spirit island. I will not intentionally be biased. There is no enmity between your two clans. This matter was only caused by a misunderstanding. I will temporarily let Marshal Nephew Feng stay at my place for a few days and ask his master to come and apologize to fellow Daoist. I am willing to be a mediator and try my best to resolve this matter. What do you think, fellow Daoist? This Wang Yingfang was a core formation cultivator, but she did not use her cultivation to bully others. Instead, she calmly discussed with Zhang Yan. Because of Guo Lai, Zhang Yan could not be too aggressive. He smiled and nodded, saying, "This method is fine. I will listen to fellow Daoist's suggestion." When Feng Yao heard this, he secretly let out a long sigh of relief. He was glad that he had escaped a disaster. However, when he relaxed, he felt sorry for the flying feather that he had used. Wang Yingfang had only refined 24 of these feathers and distributed them to her disciples and good friends. It was only because his master was on good terms with Wang Yingfang that he managed to get one. Feng Yao did not expect that he would use it before he could even warm his hands. As soon as the two of them came to an agreement, the atmosphere in the room immediately relaxed. Wang Yingfang said with a smile, "May I know where fellow Daoist Zhang is staying at now?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "My cave is right across from where the monster kings are staying." Wang Yingfang only needed to think carefully to know where Zhang Yan was talking about. She frowned and said, "The spiritual energy in that cave is thin, how can people live there?" She shook her head again and said, "Eldest senior brother has always been careless. This time, I have neglected fellow Daoist. My Swan Goose Temple is considered to be rich in spiritual energy. If fellow Daoist doesn't mind, why don't you stay at my place for a few days?" When Zhang Yan heard this, his heart moved slightly. This Wang Yingfang clearly knew that he had beaten Lady Jade to the point of death, but she still wanted him to stay. It was obvious that she wanted to stand up for him and take responsibility for this matter. However, he was a guest on Xianling Island and was disturbed. Wang Yingfang's action was reasonable, so he smiled and said, "Then I will have to trouble fellow Daoist." At this moment, in a luxurious cave residence on Xianling Island, Lady Jade was lying on the bed and moaning weakly. She looked like she was on her last breath. Beside her sat a scholar in a white robe. This person's eyebrows reached his temples, his nose bridge pierced through his forehead, and his appearance was rather heroic. He was one of the 18 monster kings of the East Sea, Demon King Xian Tong, Tong Ming. He took out a red elixir and fed it to Lady Jade. Then, he stood up and asked a tall woman with exquisite features, "You said that person's name is Zhang Yan, and he used the sword escape technique?" This woman was his younger sister, Tong Ying. She immediately replied, "Yes, this is what I asked someone to find out. There is no mistake." Demon King Xian Tong looked thoughtful, as if he was thinking about something. After Lady Jade took the elixir, she slowly woke up. When she saw Demon King Xian Tong, she could not help but cry. When Tong Ying saw that Demon King Xian Tong did not speak for a long time, she could not help but say, "Big brother, she is awake." Demon King Xian Tong came back to his senses and walked to Lady Jade's bed. He looked down but did not speak. Lady Jade's jade face was full of sorrow, and she said with hatred, "I was bullied for no reason. Master, please help me." Demon King Xian Tong stretched out his hand and caressed her cheek. There seemed to be infinite gentleness between his fingers. He sighed, "Huan, I have already warned you not to cause trouble when you are free. Why did you not listen?" 2 lines of tears fell from Lady Jade's eyes. She cried, "I regret not listening to Master. But this person is really despicable. He not only flirted with me, but also said a lot of things to slander Master. I was angry and could not help but quarrel with him. I did not expect him to be so ruthless." Demon King Xian Tong shook his head, "I know your temper. Now that things have come to this, why do you have to lie to me?" Lady Jade was a little flustered and she said in fear, "Master, everything I said is true." Demon King Xian Tong smiled strangely. His finger touched her throat, and then he gently slit it. To Tong Ying's disbelief, he took off Lady Jade's head. He rolled up his sleeves and kept her primordial spirit in his sleeves. Then, as if he had done something unimportant, he handed the head to Tong Ying and said, "Second sister, send Huan's head to fellow Daoist Zhang as an apology." Tong Ying stared at the head in a daze and suddenly shouted, "Big brother, how can you do this?" Demon King Xian Tong looked at her and said, "Why not?" Tong Ying pointed at Lady Jade's corpse and said agitatedly, "This person bullied your concubine, but you killed her and sent her to him as an apology. What kind of logic is this? If the other demon kings talk about this, they will definitely say that you are a coward. Where will you hide your face in the future?" Demon King Xian Tong heard this, but he was calm and did not get angry at all. He smiled and said, "What do you know?" Tong Ying said angrily, "I don't know. I just want to ask, where did Big Brother's temper and prestige go?" Demon King Xian Tong glanced at her and said, "Do you know the background of this Zhang Yan?" Tong Ying snorted and said, "Even if this person's background is extraordinary, Big Brother is also a demon king. What is there to be afraid of?" Demon King Xian Tong shook his head and said with a smile, "When you reach my level, you will know the difficulty of cultivation. You don't even have time to polish your skills, how can you have the time to waste on fighting? In these hundreds of years, when have I ever fought with anyone because of personal feelings?" Tong Ying felt bitter. Not only was she weak, but she was also unreasonable. She simply turned her head to the side and ignored him. Demon King Xian Tong sighed and said, "Now that the catastrophe of Donghua continent is coming, who dares to say that they can avoid it? I've only occasionally heard about Zhang Yan's background. He's a true disciple of the Yinsang sect, but that's not all. He's so young, yet he has a paradise in his hands. Who knows what will happen in the future? Today, he humiliated my concubine, but not only did I not blame him, I even killed her and came to apologize. He will definitely be grateful. If I'm in trouble in the future, I can ask him for help. In this king's opinion, this deal is very worth it." Tong Ying's beautiful eyes widened and she could not help but say, "Just as you said, Big Brother, but how will outsiders see us?" Tong Ming snorted and said, "Why do we come to seek Tao? Why should we care about what others think? Don't be blinded by the chaos of the mortal world. You need to know that thousands of years will pass in the blink of an eye. If I cannot live forever, everything will be fabricated. If it can help me achieve Tao, it will be worth it even if I have to give up my family business." Although Tong Ying felt that her big brother's words were reasonable, there was a sense of coldness and ruthlessness in his words. She could not help but think, Big Brother is harsh and merciless. For the sake of Tao, he is willing to sacrifice the person next to him. If one day he can exchange me for the opportunity to achieve Tao, will he abandon me without hesitation? Thinking of this, she could not help but shiver. Target =_blank. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.